Hey, Bob, I see you just joined the group. Would you like to do a quick mic test?
Good morning. How you doing?
Doing good, thank you. And Catherine, I see you've joined the group as well. Would you like to do a quick mic check?
Yes, can you hear me okay?
Yes, indeed. Thank you.
Thank you.
Rhonda, I see you've just joined us. Would you like to do a quick mic check?
Yes, can you
There
hear
you
me?
go. Yep, I can see you and I can hear you.
Awesome, thank you.
Thank you. Hi, Lyndon, I see you've just joined the group. Would you like to do a quick microphone test?
Yes, that would be great. Can you hear me?
Yes, indeed. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you so much.
Hi, Jennifer, I see you just joined the group. Would you like to do a quick microphone check?
Sure. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, thank you very much.
Great, thanks. I'll mute.
Hi, Sherry, I see you just joined the group. Would you like to do a quick mic check?
Yes, good morning.
I can hear you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Supervisor Chavez, I see you've joined. Would you like to do a quick microphone check?
Thank you.
I hear you. Thank you. And Deborah, I see you've just joined us as well. Would you like to do a quick microphone check?
Good morning. How are you?
Hear you loud and clear. Doing good. Thank you. Hi, Miguel. I see you've just joined the group. Would you like to do a quick mic check?
Yes, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Thank you very much.
Hi, Ignacio. Can we do a mic check, please?
Yeah, this is Ignacio. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you very much. Dan Little, can we do a mic check with you, please?
Hi, good morning.
Good morning. It's a little hard to hear you.
Just any better?
Not really.
All right, let me log out and log back in.
Okay, thanks. Deborah, good morning. Did we do a mic check with you, please?
Good morning.
Good morning. Thanks very much. Hi, Rob. Can we do a mic check with you, please?
Yes, good morning.
Good morning. Thank you very much.
Hi, this is Dan. Is this any better?
It is. Thank you, Dan.
You're welcome.
Hi, Arcel. Can we do a mic check, please?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Great, thank you.
John Mills, can we do a mic check with you, please?
Yes, good morning. Can you hear me, Dave?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Gabe, I see that you're signed on, but I don't see if you're connected to audio. If you are, can we do a mic check, please?
Good morning, everyone. Just looking to see if my colleague Supervisor Cortese has joined us yet.
I don't believe he's joined us yet.
Okay,
I'm keeping an eye open for him, but I don't see him yet.
great, thanks. Give everybody a minute to get themselves organized.
Are you okay if I continue with mic checks, or do you want to just
No,
wait
go
for
ahead,
Supervisor
please.
Cortese? Okay.
Please go ahead and do that. Thank
Okay.
you.
Dorothy, can we do a mic check with you, please?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, thank you very much.
Thanks. Give me the microphone.
Good morning, On. Can we do a mic check with you, please?
Hi, it's one. They forgot the O in front of my name. But
Oh, I'm so sorry. Hold on one moment. We can fix that. There you go.
thank you.
You're welcome. I'm still not seeing Supervisor Cortese yet. Let me see if we can contact his staff.
I got him. I'm
okay.
just going to shoot him a text real quick.
Okay. Good morning, Moretta. Can we do a mic check, please?
Hello, this is Loretta.
We can hear you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Tyson, can we do a mic check with you, please?
We sure can. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Julian, good morning. Can we do a mic check with you, please? You're muted.
Good morning.
Now we can hear you. Thanks very much.
Thanks.
Good morning, Dr. Smith. We can hear you. Thanks very much.
Sorry to be late.
Good morning, Gabe. Can we do a mic check with you, please? Gabe Cabrera, are you there?
Hello, you there?
Yes, we can hear you. Thanks. Hi, Teresa. Can we do a mic check, please?
Hi, this is Teresa. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
So we're going to go ahead and start as a committee of the whole, and so for roll call, that would just be me. We'll keep the staff from having to do that. We'll now go to public comment, and this is to speak to an item that is not on the agenda, but within the purview of the public. And we'll do 2 minutes for this part, and we'll do 1 minute for the rest of the meeting.
Understood. One moment, Madam Chair, while we get the timer set up. You said 2 minutes, is that correct?
Yes, please.
2 minutes, okay. Our next speaker is Scott Largent. I am unmuting you. Please accept the unmute. You will have 2 minutes to speak. The timer will start when you begin speaking.
Good morning, everyone. Scott Largent. I'm kind of didn't get the coffee quite yet, so still kind of a little half asleep. So I hope I don't say anything too stupid this morning. I'm stopping by my storage unit before I go to work, working over in Willow Glen, doing house repair, fixing roofs, and jack of all trades. There's a mold mediation / like fire cleanup crew that's out here near Spring Street. Now, you guys all know where this is at. That's the third world country that's right near our airport crash zone, down the street from the county building. So they had a fire there about a month ago, all the homeless encampments. So what I'm wondering, and I had dealt with a company like this, they've now brought in this company almost 30 days after a fire that we left all these people out there with all, it was just a torched area right there. It seems kind of a little late. I'm getting how San Jose does things. You guys, I've been criticizing them for a long time. I'm sure they have not only billed this thing out to the state, I'm sure they've ran it through an insurance company. I'm sure money's coming back into the coffer for the city. It's just strange stuff. Just like these trailers that sat up at Happy Hollow that we blew, I believe, 1.6 million. That was another joke. Fortunately enough, I was able to take the getaway van up there and kind of hide out off to the side, and basically went up in there, got some great videos, kind of going undercover boss on a lot of this stuff now. It's so easy to catch these people doing dumb stuff. And the best thing I can do is get the videos out on YouTube and just show, what's really going on, because you guys are talking about this stuff, but it's 2 or 3 months after I'm filming it. So I guess I'm getting there on time, and hopefully people will pay attention. That trailer thing was just a joke. Are we going to salvage those things and bring them over here off of Spring Street? Start, housing people instead of letting them burn down our whole backyard?
Madam Chair, before we get to the next speaker, I just wanted to let you know that Supervisor Cortese is here in the room, and we do now have a quorum.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Catherine. I am unmuting you. Please accept the unmute. You will have 2 minutes to speak. The timer will start when you begin speaking.
I think this is Catherine Campbell with California Protected Parents Association. Am I on?
Yes, you are.
Great, thanks. I want to thank you all for having this meeting online, and I want to ask that other meetings can continue in a Zoom fashion, which I know we haven't been able to have our meetings for our task for the task force to end child sexual abuse in our county, excuse me. And I'm not sure if, I know this is public comment, and I do see items number 4 and 5, and I'm not sure if this would fall under either one. So I'm bringing this up in public comment, that I do believe our county has a great opportunity to move forward with what's called institutional courage. The person who started the Center for Institutional Courage is right here in our county, and I think we need to take advantage of that. And that basically means that we need to have the courage to look really at our past and see what we've been doing, and have the courage to move forward and implement changes. And I know this agency and our council that we have for child abuse continues to do that. But when we only have 10% of our children substantiated for child sexual abuse, and only 4 to 6 are false, that means we're leaving about 86% of our children in abuse. So I think we really need to look at ways that, we've had this council for a long time, and it's like, why are we still at 10%? And I think this is the time that we look at institutional courage and we take advantage of this opportunity with Jennifer Fried to move forward and do the best we can for our children, because 10% is just not enough. Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is T. McCullough. I am unmuting you. Please accept the unmute. You will have 2 minutes to speak. The timer will start when you begin speaking.
Hi, my name is Teresa McCullough. I'm a neighbor on Hawthorne Way. I don't know if this is the public comment place to post a concern about the Seneca Center, or if I should wait until item 4 on the agenda. Please advise.
Go ahead.
All right. So as a neighbor on Hawthorne Way, we have not had any notification from the Seneca Center down the street to create a welcome center, a 24-hour welcome center that's going to be open 24 hours, 7 days a week, providing temporary care and supervision for child welfare and juvenile probation children. I am happy that we have interested socially to help these kids, but the Seneca Center has not advised us of any of this. They have no plan in place that I can see that would watch over this, supervise this. They have been terrible neighbors in terms of They have doubled their workforce in our neighborhood, providing no parking for their employees who block our driveways, who park on the street. At night, they open up their gates and make it a center for homeless people. They don't provide any utilities, bathrooms, nothing. So they're using people's lawns and so forth for that sort of thing. And I'm concerned that there's not going to be any supervision for this welcome center that they are proposing, which will clearly impact the neighborhood where we live, in the Von Dome neighborhood. I think that before this goes forward, there should be a neighborhood meeting with the owners of the Seneca Center down the street who've been unresponsive to our complaints. They also had a dog last week that attacked a neighbor of mine. That was, I think, just simply at the house of one of their foster care satellites on the street. So I'm here to voice my concern about the lack of interaction between us and the Seneca Center in the neighborhood, despite our trying. Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Katie Taylor. I am unmuting you. Please accept the unmute. You will have 2 minutes to speak. The timer will start when you begin speaking.
Hi, my name's Katie Taylor. I'm a resource parent for DFCS. And I'm just referring to the Welcoming Center, to the report that was submitted on the slides. It referred to stakeholder feedback that we were, the focus of our weekly calls between DFCS and caregivers was to discuss the Welcoming Center. I just want to point out an inaccuracy there. The focus of those calls has been to discuss changes related to COVID and the shelter in place. So things about court updates, visitation updates, that sort of thing. Never once has that been advertised as a way to discuss the Welcoming Center. The only stakeholder feedback that they received was the day before the Board of Supervisors meeting. So the one on Monday. So I just wanted to clarify that. Thank you.
Thank you.
That's our final speaker on public comment, Madam Chair.
Thank you so much. We're now going to go to our consent calendar. And the item 9 is the cross-systems report. The administration is recommending we defer that till September, which I think is fine. Item 12 and 13, the audit of the Los Altos Hills County Fire District and the audit of the Santa Clara County Fire District. We have had a request from one of our colleagues to defer that item to our next meeting, which I believe will be in July or August, Dave. You and I will work on when that next meeting is scheduled. And then we have a meeting scheduled for Thursday, August 27th, but we may need to do an earlier meeting. And then item 15, this is our sustainability master plan. This is a fabulous, fabulous report. And there's a lot of meat to it. And I'd like to recommend that the full board actually hear this report at the full board meeting. What I'd like to request is, prior to it coming to the full board, that the item include on section 2.3, the Air District as a program partner manager, and then to include the Air District in the Regional Vision Zero collaboration discussion on strategy 5.1. And I do want to just thank the staff for including the Bay Area Regional Collaborative in strategy 8.1. With that, I'd like to move that to the full board for the presentation. And Supervisor Cortese, do you have any changes you'd like to make in addition to those?
So just to say on the sustainability item that you were just talking about, when you say move it to the full board, when would that be? And I'm just wondering if it would make sense to perhaps just embellish the whatever the budget session is that we're going to deal with this section, to have this report, sort of opened up a little bit more broadly than we would usually do there. I'm concerned only because there's been some cuts in some areas in the budget that tie back to our regional and national sustainability efforts. And I think if we're, as a full board, talking about all that at once in the context of the master plan, we might leave it the same. We might direct Jeff to put more money toward this effort. Who knows? So those are my thoughts.
Great. Dave, what we could do is we could add it to the July 21st meeting. And that way it's before budget, and that way the board can actually hear it in its total. The presentation's about 15 minutes, and I actually thought the content was so good, but maybe July when it's not with anything else. So it's more, at least it's in people's minds. What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I can live with that. Just ahead of the budget process, that would be fine.
Great.
Thank you.
And Dr. Smith, is that all right are you comfortable with us taking that action?
Sure, that's fine.
Okay, so this will go to our July 21st meeting. Great. All right, I have no other.
And we are, and President Chavez, we are taking up the SLS item then for discussion today, right? That's item 8, I think. I didn't hear you.
Yeah, you know what? It's really up to you, Dave, on that one. I think the report's really excellent, and so I thought it was really well done. What is your thought? Would you like to hear it?
The report is really well done, and it spends a lot of time on an area that we discussed at the last meeting, the last time SLS came up, which is, sort of how the heck are we connecting with folks during the pandemic. The kids are distance learning, the families aren't coming in and out of the schools, and we got a good response last time, and I think we got an even better response in this packet, and I thank the staff for that. However, I have a thought, and if we, I think I'd be fine with continuing the item. Consent calendaring the item now that we've read it and studied it, but with one piece of direction, if we could do that. I'd like to have, the whole team from behavioral health and Dr. Smith, our county executive, look at whether or not Mental Health Services Act money could be used to help bridge this digital divide issue that we spent so much time laboring over. At the Tuesday board meeting, we approved it, but there was a lot of concern about how long can we sustain that after with general fund dollars. Here it's so clear that SLS is one of those critical components that needs to have connectivity with these households. I assume mostly the same households we've been talking about with the County Office of Education. But if we can figure out how to route that question as essentially as both a budget referral and to come back to this committee, I'd like to see that, because if mental health services money is more available to us than general fund dollars this year, maybe there's a way to use that federal dollars, partner dollars, and some general fund dollars, or some combination. I just don't think it's an area we've discussed yet.
That's a great idea. So we can put it on consent. Thank the staff again. Really, really good report. I think, Dave, what I'd like to recommend is let's ask Dr. Smith for an off-agenda report prior to the July 21st meeting about whether or not that money can be used. And the reason is that I think the discussion about these items, some can wait till the August meeting, some can't. And this is one that I think goes in the bucket of can't, because by then it'll be pretty late. Dr. Smith, is that something that can be done over the next couple of weeks?
Yeah, we'll get on it.
Okay, so we'll have a 2-week deadline for an off agenda. And then after reviewing that, Dr. Smith, if there's an opportunity to use Mental Health Services Act resources, what I would recommend is that discussion go to the board July 21st.
Will do.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. And with that, I would move to include 8 as well as the items you indicated on consent. Of course, with the items that were already published on consent, all as one motion. That includes the 2 audit deferrals as well.
Thank you. So item 9 is being deferred. Which is our cross systems report. Items 12 and 13 will come back to us at our next meeting, whenever that meeting's scheduled. At the latest would be at the end of August. The item 15, our sustainability master plan, will go to the full board for a presentation with the changes that I've requested. Item 8 will get to us with an off-agenda report to determine whether or not we can use Mental Health Services Act monies, and that if in fact that is available, that comes to the board for discussion on July 21st. And that is your motion, Supervisor Cortese, which I am seconding.
Yes, very good. Thank you.
And do we actually need to do roll call for these?
Yes, we do.
Okay.
Vice Chairperson Cortese
Aye.
and Chairperson Chavez.
Yes.
Thank you.
All right. So we'll now move to so for everybody who your items were deferred, you don't have to hang around with us unless you're just super excited about these topics, which I am. We're going to go to item 4, and item 4 is to receive a report from the Social Services Agency Department of Family Services relating to Continuum of Care services. And I think Dan Little is going to be walking us through these.
Hi, good morning, supervisors and members of the committee. Dan Little, Acting Director.
You know what, Dan? You do
Yes?
not. Great. Oh, there you go. You might have to get a little closer to your computer.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
There you go. Thank you.
So supervisors, I have a pretty lengthy PowerPoint because I wanted to be able to have discussion on some of the specific topics. So if I get too much in the weeds and there's some topics that you want me to focus on, please feel free to jump in. And Patty Irwin's going to help me go through advance the PowerPoint. So go ahead and go in, Patty. So the idea behind the Continuum of Care really is an integrated system. Our past process has been, especially when we had the receiving center at Enborg and then now at Kecky, is that we had a subsystem within a system. We had children cared for within a DFCS model, and then we were attempting to get these youth connected to other levels of service, and we were finding that there were gaps within that process. We had a certain number of children that would get kind of stuck within that model and kind of would languish in care. This new continuum really goes from how do we address that gap? How do we develop an integrated system with a comprehensive array of services from the first moment we make contact up until we get permanency for a child? Focusing on home-based settings. I think one of the things that we heard, especially last fall when there were discussions around issues that were at the old shelter, was that we didn't have an individualized care plan for each child. And the push really was to make sure that we were developing home-based, individualized plans for each child. And then the Continuum of Care, we did have feedback. We had sessions that we held with stakeholders in January. We had sessions that we held with staff starting in February. So we did develop this with collaboration and the feedback that we heard really from staff since last fall regarding the concern with the barriers that we were running into in our prior model. Go ahead and go, Patty. So I apologize, this is a little bit fuzzy, but I'll try to walk through this. In the Continuum of Care flowchart, it really starts on the left-hand side from our first engagement with that family. So with that orange box, that's our initial work, our initial emergency response social workers making that initial contact with the family. When there's a determination that a child needs to be removed, that they are starting that initial exploration and engagement on potential relatives. That's the initial component of family finding. It actually has started now with the CAN Center, where even at the CAN Center, they can start doing inquiry as to possible relatives or supportive individuals for that family that we can explore. If in that blue box, our goal is that if we do a removal, we can go directly from a removal to a new placement. So we really don't want to have a gap. We want it at the best case scenario that we've identified, either a relative or a foster family, that child can go directly from their parents' home to another home-like setting to mitigate the trauma that child's experiencing. In the situations where a child is removed or even has a placement disruption and we have a gap, so we don't have a placement immediately identified, that moves on to that gray box. So our current model is we have staff at the Keiki Center and we have staff in some scattered sites, unlicensed placements that allow us time to supervise a child while we're doing a placement search. The proposed future model would be that welcoming center model, which would then incorporate the full continuum. So when that child enters that setting, that initial clinical and therapeutic engagement starts from the first moment that they cross that threshold. That we don't have any gaps, we don't have any stoppages in that treatment and that engagement, that by moving it to a welcoming center model within a continuum with a service provider that really has that therapeutic and clinical framework within their whole agency, that we start that process immediately. And then from there, on the right side, those are the different placement levels that we have available. Some of them we have now, and some of them are just extensions of current placements. So, you know, starting from the top, we go from kind of least restrictive to most restrictive. Starting at the top at the purple, that's your relative, your neighbors, your friends, your grandmas, grandpas, uncles, aunts. Also emergency placement. So we need to do, you know, an immediate placement. We can use an emergency placement protocol that the state allows us to do kind of an immediate placement with these homes once we've done kind of a background check and a check of their home. We also have then the foster family agency homes with intensive services foster care. So that gets into a little bit more intensive placement service. The county is currently piloting a 24/7 60-day pilot with some of our current RFA homes that are able to take some more acute children with some more acute needs. So there's a little bit different pay structure, a little bit different training requirements. So we have a number of those homes that we've been piloting. Going to the orange, we have current professional parents. We're going to be the continuum proposes some new intensive treatment foster care placements that really provide even a higher level of therapeutic interventions to a child while they're still in a family level of care. All the way down to that kind of orangish is the STRTP level of care. And then we're also looking at a pilot to have STRTP level of treatment, again, within a foster home. So going back to the trend and the theme of having individualized care for these children and having individualized foster home placements available that can still meet the treatment needs of the child. So at the very bottom, we have currently we have PSS through Uplift. The Continuum proposes adding another very like service and intensive service support services through Seneca. They really help do crisis stabilization, de-escalation as a child's potentially moving from placement to placement that's needed or while they're at the welcoming center. Go to the next slide. So I included this in here just because I think there's been some questions about how the continuum impacts our current assessment. So for the Child Abuse Neglect Center, same process, same protocols, same level of assessment and screening done in today versus when the continuum was built. Next slide. So again, if a child's safety, if it's determined that a child needs to be placed in the county's care and really removed from a parent's home, our emergency response social worker starts working with our DFCS placement social workers to identify potential placement options. This is where, as we're building out our family finding, you would see family finding as a significant component of this practice, of identifying non-offending parents, any potential family members, non-relative extended family members, which you'll hear often referred to as NERF homes. And then if that immediate placement is not found, that's where that child's going to be transitioned to the welcoming center, where then DFCS will continue to then do that searching for the placement option. So throughout this protocol, DFCS staff and DFCS social workers are still responsible for locating and approving any placement options for this child. So next slide. So and then the welcoming center, and I think the thing that I'm really excited about this welcoming center is, again, you know, DFCS has clinical staff. We have a number of staff with clinical backgrounds, clinical degrees. What DFCS isn't, though, is we don't really have a clinical framework that our entire agency follows. That's just not the type of agency that we are, which is why we have really good partnerships with some of our community-based organizations that have some of the specialty mental health services. Is that we have organizations that kind of live and breathe that clinical engagement and assessment protocols for every area of their agency. So by this welcoming center, all of the staff there will be trained in utilizing the same model, from the staff that are providing the day-to-day supervision of the child up through the staff that are the clinical staff on site that are providing the actual therapeutic interventions, that they're operating under the same model. So we built some efficiencies within that. And we think that we'll actually see better outcomes and expedited, less time spent within a welcoming center kind of place, and quicker transition to a permanent placement for them. So welcoming center right now is the proposed to be located at Seneca's site on First Street. Will be available 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. The other thing that how the welcoming center is different from like the Keiki model is that they would actually be able to work with both child welfare and probation youth. So if probation had a youth that was in between placement or needed a placement, then the welcoming center could also work with those staff as well. Part of the build out for the continuum, can you go back real quick, Patty, sorry, is there will be on-site transitional foster homes. So these are regularly licensed foster homes, but they can provide more of a short-term emergency placement. If we have trouble locating a good, appropriate permanent placement, then that child can transition out of the welcoming center, which is not going to be a licensed placement, into on-site licensed foster homes. And then for the roles, so DFCS throughout this really continuum, I'm focusing on the welcoming center, but this really extends throughout the entire continuum. We're still responsible for our mandated child abuse neglect assessments. We're still responsible for supporting licensing and training our resource family homes. We're still responsible for the development and monitoring of the case plan and the permanency plan. So let's go to juvenile court. You know, I'm moving us in the direction where we would be driving that family finding, the bulk of that family finding. We would still be the facilitators of the child and family team meetings when we're addressing permanency. And we're still identifying and improving of any final placement that's determined. So in the welcoming center, like Seneca's role will help support our parents during a placement, so transitioning a child to a home. They'll provide respite, education, and crisis support to those children. They would support the child when they're at the welcoming center site. So that's really just both the supervision of the child when they're in their care, as well as that initial therapeutic engagement. They're responsible for directly communicating with DFCS staff. DFCS staff would have access to the site. Our placement social workers, emergency response social workers would be working on site to be able to have access to those children and really work on the collaborative relationship with Seneca. And then providing permanency planning support. So much like we do with wraparound now, those welcoming center staff and the full continuum of care staff, helping providing guidance and treatment recommendations for the permanency planning. Next slide. So welcoming center, so any licensing requirements, Seneca or any of the contractors we would contract with that are doing licensed care still have to follow the same licensing requirements. Again, they're going to provide the direct care to children. So when a child is at the welcoming center site, the Seneca staff would be the ones providing the direct supervision while they're on site. They're able to assist with transportation to appointments or transportation to new placements. So again, not only help us with that as a efficiency, but help provide that therapeutic relationship and transition of care to another home. And then once we have a full activation of the welcoming center, then the Seneca staff will also do the pathways to well-being mental screening, which is something that they do in other situations as well. Go to the next slide. So one of the things that we're looking at is in the new world with the continuum care built out, DFCS staff still have an opportunity to provide some direct care to some of our lower acuity youth. And especially situations where we may have a removal of a child. Our emergency response worker has identified that we have a grandparent that's able to take placement, but we know that that grandparent's at work and not available for a couple hours. We could still have a child supervision area on site at Julian, kind of where we have other childcare options to provide for lower acuity youth, especially if it's short term. And that would really be during business hours. So we wouldn't be staffing that throughout the night. That would really be just during business hours. And then again, to reiterate, DFCS placement staff are still the ultimate say in determining best placement match. We're going to incorporate the therapeutic recommendations of any of the providers we're working with, but DFCS is going to make that final determination. DFCS placement staff participating in CFT meetings as we do now. And then DFCS placement staff are going to be the main coordination with our social workers, supervisors, and managers as a child kind of moves through our child welfare system. Go to the next slide. And then for behavioral health staff completing the CANs until the welcoming center is fully activated. And then again, once the welcoming center is fully in place, some of those assessments will transition to the Seneca clinical staff. But behavioral health clinicians will continue to complete both the CANs, which is a strength and needs assessment, and the pathways to well-being, or the prior KDA, for children who are directly placed with family and RFA home or other provider homes. So for children that go directly from a removal directly into a placement, behavioral health staff would still be responsible for the assessment, the formal behavioral health assessments for those children. Next slide. So when a child goes to the welcoming center, there's going to be an intake process that happens with Seneca staff. So the child will go to the welcoming center. Typically, it's going to be a DFCS worker. It may be that emergency response worker that did a removal. It may be a social worker one staff with DFCS that transports that child to the welcoming center. There's going to be an assigned intake officer who's a Seneca employee who will then work with our staff to process an intake, really so they can understand what are this child's needs, what are their strengths, what are the things that they need to start looking for, and how can they best support this child? Well, we then go back and start doing our placement searching. There'll be clinicians on staff that will be introduced to that child. We know that child abuse and neglect creates significant trauma. Doing a subsequent removal also creates trauma for a child. So oftentimes we see children who are in a highly activated state and have experienced a lot of trauma, especially directly after a removal, that those clinicians can start working with right away. And then there's going to be a counselor on site who monitors child for safety, comfort, and well-being. So that's part of the team that they're going to be engaging with on site at the welcome center. So they're also going to use behavioral support and skill-based services to stabilize, improve functioning, reduce stress, and assist. One of the things that Seneca staff use is called the crisis assessment tool. And then again, we talked about it, going and starting to use child adolescent needs and strengths assessment to start determining how does this child present, what are the things that they need, what are the strengths that we can build upon. Next slide. Now, a big component of this is evaluation and accountability, and really this is for any of our contracted services. How do we know that we're doing what we intended to do? And if we see deviations from our intended goal, how do we make sure that we can course correct? So we have 4 overarching objectives: understanding how successfully the COC model was implemented and planned, to measure the extent to which the Continuum of Care has had an impact, identify strengths and challenges, and develop recommendations and strategies for system-wide improvement. I think that this Continuum of Care really starts taking this kind of child-centered approach, and lessons learned we can expand to other areas within the county and how we serve children. And next slide, and Christine Ferrer is with our Office of Research and Evaluation. She's online, and I was hoping I could maybe have her go for some of these slides, if that's okay. But Christine, if you're available.
Yes, hi. Can you? We've been working with RDA, Resource Development Associates, to plan the evaluation for the Continuum of Care services. So they will be our independent contractors and evaluators for this evaluation. So some of the metrics that have been identified to be included in the evaluation plan is where children are placed, placement stability, different types of services, educational, timely medical or dental. And then we have a lot of our federal measures, permanency within 12 months, permanency within 24 months, rates of reentry into foster care, and length of time to transition from child youth to care from the welcoming center. And so in the scope of work, the current draft scope of work with RDA, the first 4 months will be spent actually coming up or devising a very concrete logic model and process model for the evaluation. Next slide. And so here are the different phases. So right now, the scope of work includes phase 1, which is a project launch, identifying key stakeholders to be a part of the evaluation. Phase 2 is what I was just talking about, the evaluation planning, and the estimated length of time for that is 4 months. Phase 3 will be evaluation data collection and support. And in order to ensure objectivity, RDA will be taking the lead on any type of process measures, which include focus groups, thematic analysis of the different focus groups, the different information that comes out of the focus groups, and they will be writing an independent report regarding what they found through these interviews with different levels of staff. We have resource parents, youth, and in the report, the outline of the different groups is there. Phase 4, they're going to be providing oversight during the entire time. So the contract right now is for 27 months. So 4 months of planning, and then 24 months of measuring process and outcome measures. The RDA will be providing oversight during the entire length of the contract.
Thank you, Christine.
Uh-huh.
And finally, the communication with stakeholders. We did just have we had our initial stakeholder sessions back, I think the last week of January. Shortly after that, DFCS started having a weekly staff session on Mondays that any staff that had questions could come and I was available to answer some questions. We just had a session with Dr. Ken Epstein, who's going to be one of the stakeholders helping us with further development of the continuum of care this last week, and we're planning 2 additional. And I think the stakeholder piece is really, it's not going to be a point in time. We really are going to be reaching out as we go. And partly it's because, what we've looked at now has really been the framework of the continuum. We need to get into some of the individual kind of weeds discussion about protocols and procedures, which is where I think that we're going to have some of our staff and for right now would be Seneca staff and any additional components of the continuum. For any of our provider staff, we're going to have some further discussion about how do we actually share information and the forms, and how do we make sure that a child is transitioned appropriately between care. So the communication to this point has been to gather feedback, but moving forward, there's going to be communication and sessions for actually to develop some of the specific protocols. So with that, I'll turn it over for any questions that you may have, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to go through this.
Thank you. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go to public comment, and then I'm going to come back to the board for discussion.
Our next speaker is Vanessa Payne. I am unmuting you. Please accept the unmute. You will have 2 minutes to speak. Once the timer comes up, the timer will start when you begin speaking.
Good morning. My name is Vanessa, alumni of foster care and social worker with Department of Family and Children's Services. At the Board of Supervisor meeting on Tuesday, it is very clear that Santa Clara County is in a budget deficit that we are not expected to recover from for 3 years, and will likely lead to cutting existing contracts and layoffs of staff. We should not be approving general fund money over 4 years and upwards of $16 million to contract out Keiki to Seneca, not to mention the funding that will go into the Resource Development Center. Further, placements and services in the amount of $8 million over 4 years should not be approved, as they are all temporary, do not provide long-term stable home options for our most difficult to place children and youth. In fact, this is not what Continuum of Care reform calls for. Placement home options are supposed to be committed, nurturing, and permanent in nature. DFCF staff and resource parents are committed to working together with management to improve Keiki for our children, but we haven't been given the opportunity to do so. The question really is asking, are we at a place where we can really look at contracting out this service? And how can we work together to keep Keiki in-house that would really meet the needs of our children and youth? Thank you.
Our next speaker is Don Taylor. You have been unmuted. You have 2 minutes to speak. The timer will start when you begin speaking.
Good morning. I am Don Taylor, the Executive Director at Uplift Family Services, which serves hundreds of foster youth each week within the continuum of care. And there are 3 areas I'd like to highlight. Number one, I've experienced the department working extremely hard to try to make this new continuum of care successful and adaptable for any youth in any situation. This is an important foundation for successful teaming. Number two, in developing the initial continuum, there remains a lot of work to be done with stakeholders so that all are informed. This also better ensures that duplication of services does not occur, such as ISS in the slides. I find this to be a core area of frustration for many stakeholders, and a community team would help this need. Number three, success relies on placement, services, and teaming with the goal of permanency. Using Uplift as an example, the good news is that our professional parent homes are growing, allowing for more youth to experience success toward permanency. This could not have happened without the teaming and creativity of the department, which I'm greatly appreciative of. I look forward to continuing to be an innovative partner, and thank you to the department and this committee for hearing. Thanks.
Our next speaker is Maggie Cocaine. I am unmuting you. Please accept the unmute. You will have 2 minutes to speak. The timer will start when you begin speaking.
I want to thank the board for directing DFCS to hold stakeholder meetings. It was very helpful to have a third party facilitate the meeting. There were over 150 participants. Dozens of questions were asked on Monday, but I believe only about 10% at most were answered. And there's a record of all the questions that were placed in the chat box. So I hope that Dan or Bob can answer them today, or definitely before the contract goes back to the full board. Something as basic as where will the children sleep was not answered. Dan said that there will be no beds, or else Seneca will run into licensing problems because the state is no longer issuing licenses. We should also know if this contract will save the county money. Also, why did Seneca ask for $1.3 million more for the Resource Advocacy Support Services program when the program did fine under Unity Care with $500,000 a year for over 5 years? How can we be sure that we're not at the whim of Seneca financially once we're dependent on them after fully transitioning, receiving assessment and intake of the children, especially during upcoming budget troubles? I also want to clarify that at the June stakeholders meeting, the Welcoming Center was not discussed at all. Like another caller said, they were not talked about at the weekly meetings either. And the report also states that there was a stakeholder meeting in May. I was at that meeting. The Welcoming Center was not discussed at all. The PowerPoint is actually on the DFCS website, so you can see for yourself that there was no mention of it. I urge the committee to hold Bob accountable in the truth of his reports and to follow the board's direction when asked. Time after time, the reports are inaccurate at best, but appears dishonest and misleading. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Judith Hurley. I am unmuting you. Please accept the unmute. You will have 2 minutes to speak. The timer will start when you begin speaking.
Thank you. I live very close to Seneca, and to my knowledge, there has been no outreach to the neighbors in the immediate area about the ramifications of this project. We are concerned about the lack of outreach because we have had experiences that suggest that the administration of Seneca is not very responsive to our concerns or our needs. The prior administration of Seneca was a good neighbor, but the administrative leadership has changed, and they do not respond to our questions about issues that arise in the facilities they already manage, or parking or other things that come up in the neighborhood. We don't get any response at all. So we would really like to slow track this whole project in the hopes of hearing more about it and being consulted with before it goes forward. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Scott Largent. I am unmuting you. Please accept the unmute. You will have 2 minutes to speak. The timer will start when you begin speaking.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Scott Largent. I actually pass Seneca every day, probably 4 or 5 times a day for probably the last 4 years there on First Street. You know, I went to a lot of meetings, saw a lot of good things that they were doing, and I always wondered why I was left out, left in the corner with my child, why a lot of these services were not basically open for anybody in recovery or coming out of homelessness. And I know it's a foster care gig, but you know, we have a lot of the same things going on at that place that could help the entire community. But I'm guessing that the county gets kickbacks from the state and the federal government per foster care child. So that's probably why I don't fall in that loop there. The woman that went on there, it was very interesting that she's a neighbor there locally, and that Seneca is not rolling out the carpet. They're not communicating with the people that are in their neighborhood right there. I would think it would be a good thing that one of the supervisors could reach out to this woman, reach out to the neighborhood, and start figuring out why they're not talking, why they're having all these problems. I do kind of watch the facility there. A lot of people are parking there. There's a lot of activity there. And there's a lot of money coming in and out of that place. You know, it's a very, very high-end looking facility. And we're talking millions and millions of dollars. So I think they need to get square with the neighbors. And please, 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 I know I've come here forever. Why do people keep coming to me saying that these facilities and these places can provide services that I begged for 4 years? Supervised visitation. I should not have been I should not have had to pay hundreds of dollars an hour out at that dump next to the airport to see my child. Okay, that's the reason I'm living in a van behind your county building right now. I was spending thousands of dollars every single month trying to continue the bond with my child. And now I could become a bone acre on the county again and be homeless.
I want to thank all of the speakers. And
I'm sorry, Madam Chair, forgive me. We have one more speaker that I was unable to call up because it was on mute.
That speaker already spoke on this item during public comment.
Oh, my apologies.
Yeah, so I'm going to go ahead and move on with the conversation. Supervisor Cortese, would you like to start?
Yes, I don't, for one reason or another, the one area that I feel like I just keep focusing back in on would be if you were to look at the accountability slide in the PowerPoint that we just went through. Item 7 talks about the timeliness of placement as one of the accountability measures. And I think all of the accountability measures that are listed on the slide are appropriate. But the timeliness of placement is a huge issue. I think it's the issue that brought us to this point in the first place. Reza Chavez, you and I really caught on to that problem and you know, brought forward the original request that we bring on a moratorium if necessary, you know, on the rake and started steering this in a different direction. I mention all that because I'm not seeing, you know, actual data on that. I know during a Board of Supervisors review with the full board, we asked for, again, a dashboard kind of result, reporting on this, you know, particularly in terms of the timeliness of placement. So I don't want this to be a big negative today, because I think that our requests for accountability criteria and accountability reporting have obviously been taken very seriously. The committee is getting a report, if you look at that slide, a well thought out report by social services, you know, saying, okay, we heard you, we know we need accountability measures, and here they are. So I'm trying to take it back full circle now and say, you know, when do we get the actual placement reporting? And if that's been generated already and I haven't seen it, feel free to say that to me. It's possible. As much as I think I'm keeping up with all my reading, even during COVID and remote work, it's possible I've missed a dashboard that's been coming through on placement timing. But if not, I would like acknowledgement that that's something that's still due.
Supervisor, I can double check. My understanding was that there was a dashboard that included that for our current practices, but I will double check to make sure that that's still going out and it's accurately representing what you're requesting. I think for the continuum, that's some of the work that Christine referenced that we're going to have to work on with our evaluation contractor, is how we're going to report out in the new continuum, and that will give us an opportunity to refine some of the reports that we're submitting based on that new continuum, and some additional information we'll be able to include. But I'll double check on what you should be getting today.
Okay, through the chair, just one other different topic. Thank you for checking on that, by the way. Let me acknowledge your response and say thank you for that. And obviously, it looks like that report may have to be refined, as you continue to go forward with these criteria or any others that Supervisor Chavez or anybody else wants added on. The issue, I guess a bias that I had coming into this, really rooted in the timeliness issue, rooted in again the placement issue, was that it was very similar to what some of the public speakers were saying, and I know we've talked about this also at the full board level, but I'm still not really satisfied that an in-house model isn't the way to go in terms of a lot of the things that we just talked about on the continuum, including timeliness, and accountability issues. But it just feels like, I mean, on the one hand, social services will take that as a compliment, because I just feel like the more we can do things in-house with adaptations of our existing overhead and expertise on an issue that's this sensitive, I guess the bias is, my conclusion is, the better off we are. The more extrapolated or extended or attenuated any process gets, the more possibility there is for, accountability breaches or delayed accountability to seep in. Could you just speak to that one more time? I know you've sort of been drilled on that at the Board of Supervisors level, but you've also been asked, I think, to continue to be mindful of some of the board comments in that regard. And I just want to hear your latest response.
Yeah, and I think, where I would go back to for why I think this is the best model is the efficiencies and the connection to the practice that I want to make sure that this supports is that therapeutic and clinical engagement component. In a DFCS model, so if DFCS was operating something like a welcoming center, we would have to get a new space because the state's made it clear that the space we're using now is not something that they're interested in us using moving forward, because originally in 2017 they had said both the Keiki Center and the space on Enborg, if we operated in there, would have to fall under their transitional shelter license, and they only issued the county one, and it was for a time limited amount. It was supposed to be for 3 years while we built out a new model. So there would be the space component to make something fit that meets the needs that we heard from staff, which is, how do you separate age groups? How do we make sure that we have good clinical and therapeutic engagement, which means we need to have space for our clinical providers to be on site to be able to do that. The other piece is what I spoke to earlier. DFCS, we do incredible work. Our staff do really, really amazing work. We are not set up to be a clinical, we don't have a clinical framework behind what we do. We have a very good generalist, we have a very good child and family practice model, which guides our engagement with youth, but it's never necessarily going to be clinical like a Seneca or an Uplift or a Bethesda or any of these providers that have a specialty mental health background. So by having the welcoming center with like a Seneca, every minute that child is now on that site where they're providing some kind of supervision, they can incorporate some kind of clinical intervention and clinical oversight that just we're not going to be able to provide on our end. So I think that you're going to get a much better impact for the amount of time they spend in in that kind of a setting versus a setting that I'm going to be able to provide to that child. I think the other piece is, and I'm concerned for the county, for DFCS, is, and we're seeing it a little bit now with our scattered sites. If we have these sites, I think the danger is that morphing back into what I think we just got out of, which is we have a site that people look at as kind of the placement of last resort, even if it's not a placement. The site on Enborg, before it became like, it's operated for several years as unlicensed, and we still had kids getting stuck there for a long time. So I think by having a site like that, I think it welcomes morphing back into something that we don't want it to be. I think building it within the clinical continuum and the placement continuum, I think is how we can stay away from that, and how we can, again, holding our providers accountable to these are the outcomes that we need. We can't have any children residing in a congregate care like this longer than, they can't go stay there longer than a day. So we need to take that time to do a really good assessment of the child. And the other components of the continuum, outside the welcoming center, I think are just as equally as important, which is these higher level individualized placements. And they mesh together to really make sure that the need of that child is met, irregardless of if it's from the first removal to a placement disruption through permanency, that the continuum we're building out can meet that child's needs. What we saw at the rake, and what we're seeing a little bit at Keiki, is for the vast majority of the children in our care, our social workers, our placement social workers can find a good family-based placement within several hours. So those children aren't getting stuck in our system. It's the children that really have more of the exceptional needs that I think in the past we would have been shuffling around from all of the group homes that we had available, but we don't have that level anymore. So now they're getting stuck within our system. Those are the children that really need more intensive support. And I think this welcoming center model, by having it connected to the same clinical interventions they're going to be getting in placement, I think just helps to expedite that process. So I hope that answered your question, Supervisor.
It does, and just to follow up, and then let Supervisor Chavez have a chance here, but philosophically on something like this, for 28 years in public service, and I know you have a public service record too, so you've probably heard this kind of thinking before from people like me, elected officials from time to time. In the short term, sometimes, in an urgent situation where you're trying to move something like this continuum quickly because the cost of slow action or inaction would exacerbate a problem. It's understandable, I think, to do sort of a contracted out version of things temporarily. But the operative word there for me is temporarily, and this is a part I'm sure you've probably heard before. Again, philosophically, is my belief is a better way to utilize Seneca, for example, or all the experts that we have out there in the CBO side of things, in the clinical side of things, is to enter into a contract with them to help us create the inside department. Now, whether you came back to us and said that's going to be a 1 year, ramp up to get to the point where we can take over, or 6 months, or 2 years, or whatever, it creates, it creates the expertise and sort of the inside clinical capacity. That's the word I was looking for. That you're saying we don't have right now. That we're more generalist. In essence, I've spent a lot of time in my public service career saying, if we're going to use contractors for specific focused areas that could be done in-house with the right expertise, then let's enter into a contract that keeps them busy, essentially eliminating the need for themselves in that area. There's always going to be plenty of work for Seneca, Uplift, and everybody else over time. I don't think they have to worry about is the win or loss of the contract for this, the end or the demise of their organization. I think we could keep them quite busy in a support role to an in-house program. And I guess what I'm saying, first and foremost, help us stand it up. You know, I'd rather see that kind of a contract. And so maybe the hybrid is you need to have it now, perhaps, so you have a welcoming center stood up that isn't at the cost of youth getting stuck somewhere. But what about a part two of the effort, which is let's also go back and say with an RFP or to them and say who can help us stand up our own program, and what would your continuing role in that be if it was an in-house program? I think that's the question I'm really looking for, not necessarily to be answered at this moment, but if Supervisor Chavez was interested in that, you know, maybe as a next step and some work to be done. And whether you want to respond or not, Daniel, is up to you. But I will say to Chair Chavez, that's all I have on this item for now. Thank you.
Dan, did you want to respond to that last comment?
Just real briefly, I think that the evaluation component that I think we're going to work on, that Christine mentioned, I think will help guide a lot of the next steps to see kind of what outcomes we can achieve with this. And the other piece with this continuum is my work is to really link this continuum of care that's dealing specifically with foster care with our continuum that we're building on the prevention side. That if we can match both of those up, then the hope is we see less kids coming into the child welfare system, and we're meeting them and serving their needs in a different capacity. So I think matching both of those things up, so I think actually gets us to a good place.
Thank you. So I'm going to give some thoughts, and then I'm going to ask at the end for a couple of questions. First of all, this is for council. We have a good neighbor policy that we are to be embedding into all contracts. And this was a board policy that probably started 5 or 6 years ago. We initially focused it on behavioral health. And as I was looking at the contracts yesterday, I'm not sure I saw the good neighbor policy in all of the contracts that we are that we're signing on to. And that policy, actually the two speakers, Judith and Therese from the neighborhood, reminded me that there's a communication component in that. I don't know if the communication is inclusive of prior to a new activity, but that's something we can look at the policy for. But I do want to make sure that any final contracts on this area have that policy embedded in them. The second is I would like to ask our staff and the proposer to meet with the neighborhood and to reestablish those connections with the community. Second, on the outreach and discussion, I do want to make sure we have at least 2 more meetings with the community, and I want to just highlight the point that Maggie raised about the questions. If we have had questions in that chat box, I think starting the meeting and the next meeting with the answers to those questions so that folks can dive deeper into the other areas they're concerned about, I think would be very important. Third, I'm very interested when this comes back to the board that we see in real time the investment in the professional home expansion, including the services that are able to be provided with the professional homes. I raise this now because the professional home expansion was a core component of our restructuring of the 2 center, both Kiki and the service at Emborg, that was something that we had agreed, I thought, both as a board and as a community, that we wanted to do further investment and expansion of, and I've not seen that as part of these reports, and I'd like to. The other thing that I'll just say is a little bit of a, let me go to my questions now. As it relates to the role of family finding and whose responsibility family finding is, I was hoping you could be specific and clear about family finding in terms of the role of the social services agency, any of our partner agencies, and this includes Seneca, but where is that housed?
So currently we have family finding built to a couple of our contracts. Any child that has wraparound as a service, there's a component of family finding. DFCS has created a family finding unit that we have 5 social workers that their main role is family finding. Part of the work that DFCS is doing now is we have a contract in place with an agency called ALEA. Starting in July, they're going to start doing something with staff called intensive permanency services. That's going to be a pilot we're going to be doing. Part of that work will include DFCS staff owning that family finding. My vision is that moving forward, it'll be a collaborative partnership that we will have contracted providers as part of their work. STR Child and STRGP, they have family finding activities that happen. But DFCS will ultimately ensure that there's a family finding component that's completed. That we will be able to report out on which family members were engaged, how did we engage, how do we build that support network. I think this goes back to what I said earlier about the prevention continuum that I want to build kind of currently. That the way that we keep children successfully out of our child welfare system who have been involved is we build that natural support system while we're working with them, so that when the child successfully reaches permanency, they have a more robust support system than they had when they started. So ultimately, DFCS would be responsible for ensuring that those activities happen.
What, to me, this is to be one of the most important components of the work that we do, and it's been one of the hardest to nail down. And we've been, Dan, frankly, before you became in charge of this, we had 2 years of discussion of family finding, and I can honestly tell you, I don't know what our system for family finding is, even based on what you just said. And so what I would like to request is that that family finding, the vision that you have for it, and I understand the point you're raising is it's not all built out yet, which is fine. I just want to better understand what's our vision, and how family finding is going to be part of our go forward activities. And I raise that because I think when we get to the CAN Center, and I apologize, I should have knitted those together better. But when we get to the discussion of the CAN Center, the challenge that I see with the way the center operates is that we have been talking about the CAN Center being our opportunity to reach in and reach out, and that's not really been, from my perspective, it's not clear enough about what role that's going to be playing in our prevention work. And so if family finding is going to be a core component of our work, it appears to me that the CAN Center has to play a more vital role in that, because it feels like it's the investigatory research. It's the first place that we go to have connections with families that have already gotten into our system. So if we haven't been able to prevent them, this is where we get the call. And frankly, we get low-level indicators of challenges that families are going to have. So my request is that the family finding discussion be agendized just separately. And again, Dan, I don't need you to have all the answers. I just want to better understand your vision and what the real timeline is for building that vision out, so that I understand how that fits into both the preventative side and and how we're really moving families out of our custodial care. Thoughts about that?
Yeah, that would not be a problem to do. And I think that, the work at the CAN Center ties into something that we've talked about in the past, the neighbor to neighbor, and how we're connecting those families to something like First 5 agency. So yeah, we can develop something and report back on how everything will kind of fit together.
The other part of this, and this is actually for Dr. Smith, the other issue that I don't know when it's coming back to the board is the investment we're making in GARE, and that's our Government Alliance for Racial Equity. And it appears to me that one of the areas that GARE leadership and our GARE emphasis should be focused on is our child welfare system overall, but these particular pieces in part because they're being re-examined. And I can't recall, the board took a vote on GARE some time ago, and I cannot recall whether or not we fully funded GARE and where GARE is in the process of implementation. And I Dr. Smith, the reason I was thinking about you is I just don't know if you have anybody sitting around you that knows that budget implication.
Yes, Madam Chair, the GARE is actually moving ahead within the county. It started, as you're well aware, in the public health department, perceiving that disparity of opportunity was actually a public health crisis, and very parallel to Supervisor Cortese's referral on Tuesday. So it's now expanding throughout the county. We have had public health and EOD and a number of other departments involved in the planning and implementation. We are planning to come back to the board. I don't have a specific date with report on how we're moving ahead, and it is funded. So we're taking the perspective that equity, racial, and other measures of equity are critical to our services and need to be fundamentally incorporated into all of our services, which obviously will require some significant change in policies and procedures and perspective and culture. So it'll be an ongoing issue, but the board has indicated strong support, and obviously staff is supportive, and we will report back to you about where we are.
Right. I think that the one request we made was that the senior person there be a PM3. That was part of the board action, and that didn't come back as any of the new salary ordinances that we had. And so
right, that'll be in the final budget this year.
Great, thank you. And Dr. Smith, one thing I would like you to think about, and this really is a reflection of the way we're thinking about the Office of Advocacy for Children and Families, is that the higher I think that position is, and as it reports to you or to Miguel, I think the more seriously the organization will take it. And I mention this because I think that the first time, I really don't know how long we've been working with GARE, and I apologize. I'm glad you reminded me it was in public health. I didn't recall that. I was actually thinking that that a big leader of this had been within our social services agencies. So thanks for the reminder of the history. I think that when we get the ordinance back on the position being a senior position, I really would like to understand how GARE will be reporting to your office, Jeff, as you think about how all of this gets reformulated into our base area of work.
You were cutting out a little bit, but I think I understood the question, that we want to make sure that the organizer and facilitator and the team are highly placed in the organization and the county executive's office, and that is the intent. And we're also trying to marry that with the concept that really the departments and managers and line staff are the ones who are actually going to be changing the culture. So we do have a full team of people working on it, and we're trying to get the right membership of the group.
Thank you very much. The other thing that I wanted to just make mention of is, as you're doing outreach, I really would appreciate the assessment that we're not duplicating services with other providers. And I'm sure, Dan, that that's something that you and Bob are thinking a lot about, especially as you're trying to save every dime, that, you know, that we're not duplicating services, but making sure we do that assessment. And then the last thing I just want to ask is, well, second to last, is that I appreciate very much you building in the evaluation component. I'm very interested in us raising the level of our sophistication relative to evaluation. And one question I have is, for this evaluation partner, is this something that we did an RFP for? Or did we expand a current contract?
I don't actually, Deborah, do you know if we did?
We expanded a current contract. We've had an existing contract with them to provide this kind of service.
Dr. Smith, did you mean to raise your hand? Jeff? I don't know.
Yes, I did. I didn't want to interrupt with Deborah's response, but I did want to say from a staff perspective, the message that we've heard loud and clear from the board and that we certainly agree with is that we understand regarding the welcoming center concept that the county does not have the clinical capacity right now to implement the combined full system of care that we've been talking about, that Dan's been talking about. And we understand that social services in partnership with Seneca and behavioral health will be able to implement such continuum of care. But consistent with Supervisor Cortese's concern, we certainly would like to build within the county the clinical capacity, but that will take time, and we obviously can't wait, because the strategy that was used for the Inborg site was clearly not working, and we don't have a site that can work right now based on requirements from the state. And as we talked about, state's transition away from group homes to a different model has been extremely difficult to implement for all of the counties. So this Seneca Welcoming Center approach is only a component of the solution. We certainly want to build capacity within our organization to do the clinical work ourselves.
So,
and I should also mention that we do not envision, do not envision layoffs of the individuals who were involved with the previous model. So we're not envisioning, as people would say, contracting out.
Thank you, Dr. Smith. I want to come back to that comment that you made. I just wanted to say, let me go back to the RDA contract for just a moment, Deborah. What I wanted to just recommend is, one, as they're doing evaluations, that we're including evaluating the speaking with the employees writ large, no matter who they're working for, as a core component. But let me just go back to RDA for a moment. And I don't mean RDA specifically, but it's really just a request that I want our staff to give some thought to, is that there's a lot of really very impressive evaluation and research being done, particularly overlaying bias as an evaluative point in terms of how we do our work. And what I would really like to see us do is either challenge current partners to be able to help us with a much richer level of assessment, or that we really are looking for a long-term partner for the county that can do this sort of research in a way that lifts up our game. So part of the reason I was asking about GARE while I was talking about this is that we know there is so much bias. I'm so sorry about my camera zooming. I'm a techno peasant. I don't know how to stop it. I don't know what, I don't know if there's, what happens there. So anyway, so I apologize for that, making you all motion sick. But I mention this because my feeling is that, or my thinking now is that we should not be simply counting the length of time and the number of ducks in a pond, but that we're really trying to look at our work more in a more holistic and frankly in a much more sophisticated way. And there are some assessments that I've seen from other organizations that have just been so impressive to me around equity that I want to make sure. And again, this may be a Dr. Smith question too, is that I think the way, we do JOCs right now for construction for all over the county, and we'll maybe put 5 or 6 people in our queue to get work from us that we think have hit a certain level of performance. And I'd really like to see us doing that same thing for research and evaluation, because I think it would allow cross-agency examination of really looking at the newest innovations around research and evaluation. And I think it will support organizations, and I'm not picking on this one because I don't know all of their capacities, but I think it would support our ability to even help organizations invest in the level of research if they know that we're looking at them to take looks at lots of different parts of the organization. So that's one issue. And then the second is that, and this really goes back to the point that Dr. Smith just led us on with the clinical capacity, because one of the most interesting things I think to hear our team say is that we don't have clinical capacity given that we have a whole behavioral health department. And that's an interesting challenge for us, right? Which is that we have 2 massive, important departments, one that's got an expertise in child welfare and the other that is an expert in clinical assessment. And I think, and again, this may not be the right partner, but I think evaluation partners that have a pretty high level of capacity are going to help us think very differently about the way we do our work. And anyway, so that kind of knitted together. I don't know what your thoughts are on that, Deborah. I'd be curious.
So one, just to say, we are one of the GARE partners. We've been partnering with public health for the last 3 years. And more recently, for the last 9 months, we have designated a position to help support the countywide effort, as well as do the work that you're talking about related to hiring and also looking at equity and social justice lens for our contractors. So that's some work that we're beginning. So, and we're incorporating that throughout. The other thing is we wholeheartedly agree around the elevation of research and evaluation through the support of the executive office and the board. We've been able to add resources in the last year. And so that area under Dr. Sonia Hamon is looking at partnerships, not only with RDA, but also with universities. I mean, this area is rich with universities who do outstanding research. And so increasingly we'll be reaching out to them to partner, and also through that exercise, being able to elevate our own internal skill sets. So just some thoughts, and I don't know if Bob wants to add anything.
Thanks, Deborah.
No, I don't have anything to add. I think that's a conversation that we have been having and trying to flesh that out more with our internal resources, just as Deborah said.
Thank you. That's really helpful. And I think what I'd be really interested in, and I know this is something that Dr. Blume has been thinking about too, is that I think restructuring our partnerships around research and research and evaluation, it's like we're in the right zone. And you're completely right, Deborah, that this is the right time to take a look at that. And some of the discussions we're having with the universities around a number of issues, you know, the research capacity of these universities is profound, and they're right in our backyard. And again, building those relationships, I think, would be something worth us having a deeper discussion about. I'll give more thought to that and get on your dance card just to maybe brainstorm with Dr. Blume about how we would do that. But that's very interesting. I do want to go back to the point that I just raised about the clinical capacity question. And I wonder, Dan, if you have any thoughts. I apologize, I pivoted to Deborah and I didn't get a chance to ask you about my thoughts about clinical capacity and child welfare.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's always a capacity for us to incorporate more clinical frameworks within our work with child welfare. I think at its core, child welfare historically has kind of walked a fine line between being clinicians and being child welfare professionals and child welfare social workers. And I think the other piece with the clinical work is, you know, with going back to what our providers do, there's a difference between, I think, having a clinical perspective and viewpoint and that clinical lens versus every service you provide is under that clinical umbrella. So you're always in that lane versus kind of being able to go back and forth. And I think, you know, as we build a continuum that really incorporates services and interventions that are in the community-based organization framework, that making sure that we're tying into that somehow. I think the danger is building two different lanes that run kind of concurrently as opposed to one continuum. I think that's the danger I think we have, especially during this initial phase we're trying to build something out. We really don't want to build two competing pieces. We need to make sure that all of the elements fit together.
You know, I think one of the things I'll just reflect on back to you, Dan, is that a comment you made is that there's a clinical engagement framework and some agencies have it, but we aren't that kind of agency. And I think the question is, if we should be, why aren't we? If we shouldn't be, why aren't, you know, what's the, like, is the ultimate goal to get us to be a more clinical based approach or not?
Yeah, and I think that, you know, we definitely, our child and family practice model, the work that we're doing with like ALEA, for instance, to bring in intensive permanency services, I think edge us closer to that. The difference is always going to be at some point where we don't hire positions that are strictly clinical positions. So when I say that that's not necessarily the framework of our agency, we're not set up necessarily that way, just like behavioral health is set up to do some different things than child welfare. And I think to the earlier point, there is capacity for cross-learning and cross-teaming and developing that capacity to do that. So it's not that it's not a capacity. I think it's really looking at the expertise and what we do best. And I think, you know, the CBOs, the reason why some of them have that, especially mental health work, is because they've shown that that's part of their kind of day-to-day work, that's who they are, that's the work that they do. And we do the child welfare assessment. We do a very good job assessing risk and assessing safety. We incorporate clinical perspective and clinical interventions, and we have staff that understand very much the clinical lens. But we are not a clinical provider per se. So I think that's the difference.
Right, and I think what I'm having a hard time with is that when you say we are not the provider, clinical provider, I think of the royal we being the county writ large.
Right.
As a matter of fact, we're enough of a provider that our own behavioral health department was able to help craft the RFP or RFQ even the contract with Seneca, right? Because they do have that expertise, so we have it in-house. But I think I understand the point you're raising, and this was a very helpful discussion. I'm going to ask if there are no other comments, supervisor or anybody else, I'm going to just request that I don't think we need to do much on this except receive the report, which doesn't really take a board action, but, or maybe it does because we're receiving it as a referral. So we're going to receive the report. You've received a number of comments and requests for information that are embedded in this. This will come back to the board in July, and there are a number of steps that are being requested of you prior to that. I would like to request that the community meetings happen at least a week out from that July 21st date, so that we're not jamming people up, so that we have 2 more of those meetings, a meeting with the neighborhood that we asked Seneca to host, but we should participate. And I'll consider the other, and then the request for more, a distinct plan on family finding. And I'm asking council to take a look at our good neighbor policy and at some point bring that back to this committee for discussion, either us or FGOC. All right. So Supervisor Cortese, can you make that as a motion? I'll make it as a second and we'll do a roll call vote.
So moved.
We have a motion and a second from me, and we'll do a roll call vote.
Vice Chairperson Cortese
Aye.
and Chairperson Chavez.
Yes, thank you. All right, we're going to move to item 5. And, okay. So we're going to take item 16 and we're going to move it to the consent calendar. We're going to say a very big welcome to Mr. Clark, who is our new Chief Procurement Officer. And we were going to have him speak, but we hope he's doing procurement things and not going to be here for 2 hours. So we're going to let him go. We'll put item 16 on consent. I also would just recommend that we can put the CAN Center item there too. And on the CAN Center, let me just look real quick. The one request I had of the CAN Center presentation, and this is item, mostly we're doing this so staff that we are respectful of your time and don't get to the end and apologize to you for not being able to report. But on the CAN Center, what number was that? Number 14, thank you. Let me just look real quick. I think, Dan, on the CAN Center, there were 2 recommendations that I wanted to make. And one is that I'd really like us to look at doing some more campaigning around educating people about the risks of child abuse and getting that hotline number out. And my office, and I know Dave's office, would be happy to work with you on some work on that area. And the other is I want to recommend that the CAN Center report be sent out to the board with a link that's dynamic, so the board has the ability to actually look at that information in a dynamic way. I know we've been moving in that direction, but not quickly enough. And so those would be my 2 requests. Dave, are you comfortable with that if we move both item 16 and 14 on consent and take a vote on it now?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and move those.
Thank you, and I'll second. Can we get a roll call vote?
Vice Chairperson Cortese
Aye.
and Chairperson Chavez.
Aye. Thank you very much. We'll now go to item 5, and this is our prevention efforts. And I'm going to ask our colleagues to, I'm going to turn my screen off just so I'm going to see if I can fix my bobbing, my bobbing camera, but we're going to turn this over. This is our, we have a big team here that are going to be presenting that have been doing quite a lot of work on this. And we're going to let them begin. And may I ask folks to introduce themselves as they begin presenting?
Yes, good morning, President Chavez and Supervisor Cortese and County Executive Team. My name is Deborah Portia Usher. I'm the Chief Deputy Director for the Social Service Agency, and I'm pleased to be able to provide you and lead off the discussion on what our current activities are around prevention, as well as some future immediate activities that we will be moving forward on. Just to remind you, there's some core things that we're looking at when we're working with communities is the root cause of community issues, and also taking in consideration the community's perspective for solutions in a manner which current investments are being deployed. We're also looking at how we engage community, and that refers back to our earlier conversation, including equity and social justice from the community standpoint and how they're defining it, and how they're also describing to us the way that our current investments are addressing those issues. The third thing is that we're looking at building upon our current operations, but also we're looking at increased alignment to ensure efficiencies and also a seamless system of delivery, and developing new resources. So you'll hear about the recent grant that we collaboratively applied for ACEs from one of my colleagues. You also will hear more from Daniel around Neighbor to Neighbor and our collaboration with First 5 related to that, and Jolene about her super FRCs and how we build upon that from the lessons learned from UAP. Also, we recognize that in addition to that is the measuring of the effectiveness of any of the efforts. And so moving forward, will also be some emphasis placed on the evaluation, and you'll hear about some of the evaluations and some of the current activities, but more importantly, the work that we need to do toward the end of the presentation to bring that total evaluation and impact discussion and maybe bringing some additional resources to the table. At this point in time, I'm going to turn it over to my colleagues.
Hi, good morning. I'm Rhonda Beasley, and I am the MTSS coordinator over at the Santa Clara County Office of Ed. Patty, do you want to move to the next slide? Thank you. So to build off of what Deborah just spoke about, as part of the increased alignment, the approach that we're taking for the preventive effort is around building a systemic collective impact approach to redesign and build resilient communities, where we focus on dismantling the school to prison pipeline, and in that work really focus in then on eliminating the intergenerational cycle of disadvantaged families. The process that we're taking, the approach that we're using is really where we begin with an assessment and an analysis. So currently we're conducting empathy interviews, really to try to understand people in all aspects of the system. Through that data that we're collecting, we'll be able to examine the culture a little bit differently, but then to use what we've learned to develop that shared vision. So what are we all committing to working towards, and develop the culture then around that shared vision. That will then help us to build out a single system of support, which I'll be able to define in just a little bit. And then under a single system of support, we're able to identify needs and match services to those needs and priorities. Next slide, please. And so this slide here represents some of the systemic frameworks that actually are being used throughout different parts of the system, including the County Office of Ed as part of the system as well. And so what we wanted to take a look at is what are the parts of all of these frameworks that people are familiar with, bits and pieces of, and how do we actually now collectively work together? If you can click, please, Patty. And so we're really drawing on some of the work that many of the members of CAST have studied under, which is the 6 conditions of systems change. Many members attended a training led by Peter Senge, who has written about this work. And all of the frameworks that you saw before really get at how do we address the 6 conditions of systems change. While looking at the structural change is important, we also want to begin to examine the relational level of change, which would be relationships and connections and power dynamics, and of course to that transformative level of change, which would include mental models.
So good morning, Madam Chair and Supervisor Cortese. My name is Moretta Juarez from Behavioral Health Services Department. So as we think about the systems framework, it's really important that we align our efforts to measurable outcomes. And so we are all already working with families, and that many of these programs are very effective. And so our goal is to link our efforts through this common agenda and then aligning them to shared outcomes. And as a result, we can get to shared understanding of which programs are effective at moving the needle. And so as we continue to move this work forward, we also are looking and working on aligning services to families in the community, identifying gaps and needs, and how we can work collaboratively to address them, and really working towards driving toward common outcomes. Next slide.
Good morning, Board President Chavez and Supervisor Cortese. My name is Arcel Vasquez Bluma, Director of the Office of Cultural Competency. Thank you. Previous slide, please. Thank you there. The matrix. Thank you. This matrix before you is a sampling representation of early prevention strategies from across the county to provide support to families in their communities. It also highlights the different areas of focus of the different efforts, such as practice that is grounded in the community, health and well-being, etc., as the columns show. There are 2 noteworthy points that called us to action for coordination and alignment to better serve families. First, in the work to, sorry, my phone is ringing and I can't stop it. First, in the work to serve families through a prevention lens at both the direct service level and cross-system coordination level, we realize that we are all partners in these efforts, that we all attend the same meetings. Secondly, as the matrix demonstrates, denoted by the shaded cells in green, we all share similar approaches to service delivery, but perhaps with different or variations in the target population, the location, levels, and types of support. There are a lot of great efforts rooted in early prevention anchored in the community. The next step is to continue to more deliberately build a fully coordinated and aligned system of care to better serve families in their communities towards positive and observable outcomes. Next slide, please. The CAS prevention partners, who typically provide direct service to families, developed a theory of change model to strengthen all families equitably. Foundational to this vision is that prevention work is community-driven and grounded in quality customer support relationships. Partners are guided by shared common outcome goals at both the individual and family levels. As an example of what this looks like in practice, the Universal Access Pilot Program, or UAP, brings together partners from the county, First Five, County Office of Education, and the school districts of Alum Rock and Franklin McKinley to coordinate and align services in order that all families receive the support they need without duplicating efforts or adding unnecessary multiple touch points. The UAP partner network is guided by a shared pathways to success logic model with common measures that cluster around 6 UAP pillars or determinants of health and well-being, such as housing security, food security, linkage to quality early education, and developmental assessments. These are all represented on this slide in this logic model before you. Data showed UAP data showed that as more of the 6 UAP pillars were met for families, it positively correlated with increases in kindergarten readiness. UAP partners have done a lot of collaborative work to develop a common vision and practice for a shared governance, leveraging resources, and more recently, developing a shared family engagement model. We were thus well prepared to respond collaboratively to emerging needs as a result of COVID-19. First, we changed our approach from only serving families with children birthed through third grade to include all families with children of any age across the 2 school districts. In the first 6 weeks of shelter in place, 476 referrals were triggered with 800 family members receiving supports. Many of these referrals included navigational support to complete benefit services and unemployment insurance, which with many of our immigrant communities needed navigational support due to computer literacy and language needs. Also in our weekly UAP partner check-ins that happened as soon as we went into shelter in place, early needs were baby wipes, baby needs, and formula. First Five activated to meet this need, and then together with the County Office of Education, also distributed calming kits with hotline numbers to mental health in behavioral health. These are only 3 examples of how we are leveraging cross-system partnerships to better serve families in their communities, to avoid or prevent chronic or acute family stressors. This could not have happened without the coordinated partnerships with commitment to common outcome goals and vision. Next slide.
Hi, good morning. Dan Little with DFCS. So what is all of this going to take? We talk about, kind of where we want to get to, but it's going to take a significant paradigm shift across kind of the broader system. So moving from a system where where clients and families feel that services are siloed, and they feel like that there's gaps, and that they're getting handed off from service to service, and building something that's seamless and integrated. And one of the things that you'll see is there's a lot of similarities between this paradigm shift here and the paradigm shift that I spoke about earlier in the Continuum of Care, that it really is that integrated component. Going from a feeling of a transactional to relationship-based. where clients have a passive participation to activated, engaged, and empowered. Going from facility-centric work to client-centric. You know, that can be highlighted really some of the work that we're doing with First Five. And Deborah had mentioned this idea of kind of super FRC sites, where there are sites that the community that are within the community network, that families can go and access a number of interventions and services and supports. Going from reactive to preventative, and for child welfare specifically, you know, that's a hard one because we typically are reactive. We respond after trauma is happening. How do we respond before we see that into trauma occurring? Provider to a team approach. How do we build that team? You know, the work that's happening with County Office of Education, the work we reference with Neighbor to Neighbor, all of those highlight the work of this team approach, and really getting out in front of issues and being proactive and preventative, and really supporting this idea of a no wrong door concept. So how do we build relationships and partnerships to work together, so that the families are truly being served? You can go to the next slide.
So as I mentioned before, I was going to have this opportunity to define what the single system of support is, because a lot of the questions that we get as we present to the different cast members is what exactly is a single system of support. And this slide here represents the elements or deliverables that we would see as we really build out and sustain the single system of support. So it starts with leadership. And we want to say who's at the table. We want to have decision makers at the table, and always constantly revisiting who's missing. So do we have community voice at that leadership table? And within this leadership, we want to then have an understanding of that shared agenda. What is the purpose of the single system of support? Out of that, we also want to see the infrastructure for implementation. So do we have a teaming structure, a cascading teaming structure? So different levels of teams. And in those different layers of the teams, in that cascading structure, we also then have a communication plan. How do we communicate up and down that cascade? How do we communicate out? Who needs to be communicated with and when, how often? And so there's a plan in place to ensure that we are communicating all of the work taking place, and that there's a flow for how information flows throughout that cascade. We would also have a collaboration plan. How do we agree to work with each other, and not just across agencies, but even within agencies? And so that would be part of the communication as well, to ensure that when decisions are made, there's a plan to roll that out throughout respective agencies. And again, we have norms for how we work together. For mutually reinforcing activities, we're thinking about how do we leverage each other to access services and support, right? So if we're talking about, again, the no wrong door, how are we leveraging what we can all offer to provide this level of service? And in so doing, we actually all have an agreement that the first tier is prevention. We're all focused on prevention, and we all have an understanding of prevention. So it doesn't matter what agency we go into, we all understand that that first tier of support we're providing is about prevention. And then of course, we build out our intervention. We look at data-based problem solving. We commit to using data as the source of how we solve problems, how we examine our system. And we also then think, as we build out all of this work, what are those measurement pieces we agree to utilize to show that we are having the effect that we're having, and that we're also engaged in constant evaluation of our work.
Good morning, Supervisor Chavez and Supervisor Cortese. My name is Jolene Smith. I'm the CEO for First Five Santa Clara County and a proud member of this CAS system that you've been hearing so much about. But as you know, the words that we have shared with you today are words unless we put them into action. So what we're about to move out into within the next 8 months, but throughout the summer, our planning is the release of a RFP that would contain the framework, the measurable access, the survey, the demonstration of a continuum of the cohesiveness, identifying gaps and barriers, and how to build on a integrated family model. An integrated family model in community, not one system in charge, but collaborative leadership focused on a no wrong door approach, especially no wrong door approach that provides universal access to families in a place-based approach. We will be establishing a continuum of care from prevention to treatment access. The partners that will be at the table will be inclusive. The partners that will be at the table will be those that the community themselves, in a community-driven process, identify they need in order to strengthen their families, to meet the needs of their families so that they can continue to grow strong and healthy and access our wonderful Santa Clara County community. I think for families, this providing the single system of support is based on the strengths of what we as partners are ready to shift. I think you heard in my previous colleagues that if we don't begin to shift, and it requires a shift, where we look deep into our systems and say, what do we need to do? What do we need to do collectively, and what do we need to do together to establish priorities, policies that in some cases may need to be transformed, and then measure that transformation and its impact of that transformation on our community. I think that working with each other, but working with external folks who have gone through similar or like processes, we've been able to secure partnerships with the Casey Family Program, who will be helping us to look at programs throughout California that are actually serving in much the same capacity, programs like in Orange County. The Neighbor to Neighbor program that Daniel mentioned earlier, looking at the Oakland Community Driven Solutions program, looking at San Francisco and some of the innovative practices they've put together with their partners in a braided funding model to ensure that we can actually sustain the work we start in this transformational process. As you know, we've been working, First Five has been working for the last 7 years in a community engagement strategy, place-based approach to supporting families within our 27 family resource centers. So when this CAST team came together and identified that we're willingness to work in this approach, then it was a perfect opportunity for First Five to say, well, we're just about to release our new our new RFPs for our family resource centers. How do we take what we have learned from the UAP, our practices over the last 9 years around community engagement and really moving partnerships to meet the needs and being transitional and changing all the time based on what the community identifies they need? How do we take what we've learned in our evaluative process and apply it into beacons? And for lack of a word right now, work of a phrase or a couple words right now, we're looking at beacons of hope. And what we hope to create together under our CAST umbrella are 4 identified beacons that take all of this learning together, to take this no wrong door approach where we have this commitment to transformational change. And I say that again, because we have to look deep into our own organizations and make those transformational changes. How do we take those beacons and put those in specific place-based approaches in communities where our most vulnerable families are? How do we engage those communities? And much the way First Five has done thus far in a leadership capacity, employ those community members at working in those FRCs as they do now within our current FRC structure. How do we engage them and really develop our strategy, our strategic plan together with solid agreements for sustainability, so that we're not setting up something in these beacons that relies on funding, but rather relies on commitment to change systems to create sustainability. So to that end, what we're about to endeavor on is working together, working with MIG to develop our RFP that we will collectively agree upon. We'll release that RFP in the fall. A panel, including community members in the development. We've done focus groups already in the 27 FRC community-based strategies we have now, finding out if those strategies are creating impact, what would be different, what would look different, taking all that learning from the UAP and really putting it into this RFP, and then having it go out, and then having a panel representative of the partnerships as well as community to decide who is best to help us create these 4 beacons. Once that is determined in February, the contracts for these 4 sites will be awarded, and we will begin implementation in July of 2021. We're really excited, supervisors, from a First Five perspective, to put this into play. It's been our vision all along that every one of our FRCs would create a no wrong door approach. We've achieved as much as we can achieve, but we hit barriers all the time from a systemic approach for our community. This will be our demonstration. It is our long-term vision, supervisors, that this is the way every one of our FRCs in partnership would operate in community. It's a #1 prevention strategy that is really research-based. But in addition to that, we will also be able to lay in a continuum of care with our partners in a different way of business that would provide prevention, all the way of securing necessary screens and assessments, leading to long-term treatment if our families need it for however long they need it. So thank you, supervisors, and we look forward to coming back to you with this RFP. And Supervisor Chavez, I want to tell you an RFP that First Five is releasing that goes back to your earlier point, and it's going out. In fact, it's being written, but it'll be laid into all of our internal and external policies. This RFP that we're releasing, I'm going to read to you, is seeking the services of a consultant, individual or firm, to design and implement a comprehensive work plan to inform how we can best approach diversity and inclusion, including implicit bias in our internal policies and our external practices. While the focus is on First Five internal policies and practices, the work plan will inform our programmatic strategies and contracting. The consultant selected will have experience guiding nonprofit / or government agencies through the implementation and completion of an organizational-wide diversity, equity, and inclusion transformation. And I'm hoping that once this RFP gets released and the consultants are chosen, I will bring my partners into helping us with that, but that this whatever is developed will actually influence this whole no wrong door approach we're about to engage in. So thank you, and I'll hand it off to my next partner.
Hi, good morning, Board Supervisor Chavez and Cortese. My name is Catherine Spears. I'm the Program Manager for Schooling Services. We wanted to share with you today about a success story of a 5th grade student from McKinley Elementary in the Franklin McKinley School District. The student was referred to Schooling Services Service Coordinator because concerns from a teacher of behavioral concerns. And then the student was referred then to the Prevention and Early Intervention Behavioral Health Program through Catholic Charities. But there was still a need for higher level of care. So the youth was then referred to Schooling Services at Uplift Family Services through a warm handoff from Catholic Charities. The coordinator then learned that the family experienced a trauma event, witness to gang violence in the neighborhood, and the family had experienced economic hardship and challenges as well. So the referral was then made to the Universal Access Pilot, UAP, for case management services. The collaboration between Franklin McKinley School District, Schooling Services at Uplift Family Services, Schooling Services Service Coordinator, UAP, as well as the Catholic Charities with Prevention and Early Intervention, provide the family with access to community resources to help improve the family's knowledge of mental health services and available support within the community. The family became aware of housing resources and food resources available in the community, and the effort and collaboration with the different partners involved helped gain the parents' trust into the school and into the process of support and linkage to community resources. Next slide.
This slide is just a very high level overview of the time that we are looking at in fully developing and implementing the single system of support. There are a lot of activities within each point that are not outlined here, like the timeline for the RFP that Jolene previously referenced. But overall, we are expecting to have a full implementation plan by the end of 2024.
So we're pleased to be able to share with you the benefits of some of your earlier investments, and also to share that the relationships developed through CAST have really helped. Those two critical factors have really contributed to where we are today, and also build the foundation for us to really transform the way that we deliver services that recognize, one, equity and social justice, but more importantly, that communities themselves can help us not only identify the issues, but the solutions, and need to be a part of that partnership from the beginning. And that is the premise upon which some of these next steps are built. One is, you heard about the empathy, and I always say strength-focused interviews with key stakeholders, because not only are we to be empathetic, but we are to value their experience and their knowledge around their community and their needs. So therefore, they'll help us identify and assess the effectiveness of our current services as far as identify resource gaps and opportunities to better align the current resources that we have. We also see the next step is partnering with First Five, and so I'm not going to go into more detail around the development of the Super FRC, where all of us will begin to look at how we can redirect, redeploy some of our resources to help solidify a real comprehensive service array for families and communities in partnership with them. Also, the collaboration more recently has yielded our ability to get a state grant, the ACES grant, and it was a collaboration that across this system and the partners here today, and the lead was First Five. And so we're excited about, we'll be able to implement that. And if I recall correctly, that's a grant for $250,000 to engage communities into the discussions around adverse childhood experiences, which we know directly relates to equities and social justice, as well as trauma, which will allow us then to continue our trauma work as well. Key to this is aligning our services to optimize community engagement and input, equity and social justice, approaches to service delivery, trauma-informed and evidence-based models that deliver a seamless system and access to service delivery for communities. By doing that, we increase the capacity for communities to not only partner with us, but also to be service deliverers themselves. So at this point, we turn it over to you for any questions that you may have of any one of the members of the team. And thank you again for the opportunity.
Thank you all for this really robust report. Let me start by seeing if Supervisor Cortese has any thoughts or questions.
Yeah, I guess just a comment, not really a question. The report's very, very thorough. The comment is the CAST, piece of this organizationally has just come so far, incredibly far in a good way. I just remember it starting off sort of as a byproduct of a request by Judge Lucero at the time, asking us, not to be either redundant or at cross purposes between on the justice side in terms of basic processes, even just things like blood tests that were being taken at the time and lab work that was not coordinated. And now, this version of this work that's happening, with all of this collaboration, is the word I was looking for, is, extraordinary compared to where it started. So I'm glad everyone stuck with it and didn't just, get frustrated that, hey, this is just another meeting that we're forced to go to talk to each other about interface. And we have 5 others like this week. I know there was early on some concern that this would be redundant in and of itself, and certainly it's not. So look forward to the RFP that's coming forward, and when that happens, hopefully we'll have a chance. I'd like to put my request on the record right now, Supervisor Chavez, to Dr. Smith, to make sure that the RFP is distributed to the board. We have a process for looking at the ones we want to look at before they go out, just to make sure that if we do have any input specifically in the RFP, it can be responded back confidentially to the administration to say, ask those questions or make those comments, and not risk a misunderstanding later when everything comes back in. So that would be my only request at this point. But again, thank you for all the thorough work and exciting work. And you certainly have tremendous amount of expertise and experience involved in all this. Great job.
We'll certainly do that, Supervisor.
Thank you, Dr. Smith.
Thank you. And let me again say thank you to all of you for presenting. It was very thoughtful and very thorough. We have one public comment on this item, and this is item 5, our prevention efforts, just for the speaker. So we'll go to the public speaker before we move to our next item.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Our speaker on this item is Catherine. I am unmuting you. Please accept the unmute. You will have 2 minutes to speak. The timer will start when you begin speaking.
This is Catherine Campbell, and I want to thank everyone for all their efforts to come together as a team to bring change to our community and to help our children and to serve them. A couple things I noticed in this is no matter how many teams we bring together, and our task force had shown this, is that if there's a culture to not name abuse, that no one else feels they can. And that culture is what we need to shift, because it doesn't matter how many groups we bring together or how many processes, because everyone has a process, but even with the process, things are being missed. And one thing I think we really, there's so many great reports that come out, but one thing I noticed is a healthy family is the best, and I completely agree, an intact family and healthy people. But we need to be able to look at that and accept that some people make a choice not to change. No matter what they say, oh, I'm fine, or I want to be this type of parent, it doesn't mean they are. And ACEs continue to go up when we dismiss that and say, well, an intact family is healthier than a family that's separated. And we spend so much time and money trying to keep this intact family, which increases ACEs, instead of supporting financially and emotionally and in so many ways, a family, a protective parent who wants to step away from abuse and raise their child themselves. And that's one thing I know in Mr. Little's presentation, they talked about the non-offending parent, but we don't see anyone take the non-offending parent. The empirical data that's come out shows that we dismiss them. So we need to take time to support anyone who wants to have a healthy family, whether it's intact or not. And I appreciate all the work that you're doing to bring this forward. Thank you.
Thank you. With that, I'm going to ask Supervisor Cortese to make a motion to receive the report.
So moved.
And I'll second that, and we'll do a roll call vote.
Vice Chairperson Cortese? You're muted, sir.
Aye. Sorry
Thank
about
you. And Chairperson Chavez?
Yes, thank you. And thank you again to all the presenters. All right, so we're going to move on to item 6, and this is to receive a report from the Social Services Department of Children's Family Services relating to childcare options and caregivers.
Hi, good morning, almost good afternoon. Dan Little with DFCS. We should have a slide going up. So just a pretty quick update on childcare options. You can go to the next slide. So some of the childcare resources that are available in the community and through DFCS, we have the Emergency Bridge Program, Title 40, and then the Foster Parent Recruitment, Retention, and Support, or FIPPers sometimes, is administered through DFCS, while CAP is administered in the community. The programs do support one another, and that DFCS pays for the support for foster parents with our programs, and CAP assists biological parents when the child returns home into the community. DFCS doesn't receive the CAP funding, and then CAP is not exclusively to foster youth, and it's managed by Go Kids and Child Development, Inc. And I think in the data that we presented, that FIPPers and then the Title 40 data is combined. They both have pretty similar eligibility criteria, so it is combined. And then 40 eligibility is required for children to receive subsidized childcare through the program. And there is a county match that pays for non-federally eligible. I can go to the next slide. So the CAP, or the Child Care Alternative Payment Program, was recently reallocated by the California Department of Education. It will be only available through Go Kids and Child Development Inc. In the community. As a side note, the resource and referral program will be administered through the County Office of Education. And then the Emergency Child Care Bridge Program will be a collaborative effort with the County Office of Education. The FCS will continue to subsidize childcare, and the County Office of Education will provide navigation services for caregivers and trauma-informed training and coaching for child care providers. So we have started the discussions with County Office of Ed. They're in the process of finalizing the scope of work for the next fiscal year. We will continue to subsidize childcare for caregivers who have completed the RFA or relative resource family approval process through Title 40 and through FIPPers. So with that, if there's any additional questions, I'd be happy to answer.
I wanted to see if Dr. Dewan, if you wanted to add anything, and I appreciate you being here.
Good morning. Thank you so much. Just would add that we really appreciate the partnership, and we've been working very closely with the team at the county to ensure that there would be this availability of childcare, and just really here to offer support and to assure President Chavez and Supervisor Cortese that these services would be provided to families as needed.
Dave, do you have any comments?
No, I don't on this one.
Thank you. First of all, I'm really excited that the resource and referral is really going to be housed with you all, Dr. Dewan. And the one thing that I want to make sure of is that there is some mechanism for making sure that the partnership between the County Office of Education and the County of Santa Clara lasts far out after you and Dan are here. Like, we've got to really give some thought to that. And what I was hoping is if you all wouldn't mind putting your heads together about how our partnership may work, like how does that blossom? I'd be really interested in having that discussion in the September timeframe, particularly because we put some money toward childcare the other night. I know we've been trying to really put our arms around all the different ways we're providing it. But this fall may be a good time, in particular because I understand that the governor kept some money in childcare, not as much as we wanted, but to better understand how all of that will work. And my hope is that through a discussion, Dr. Dewan, between you and Dan and Deborah and Bob, their team, that it may allow the county to think much more strategically about where and under what terms and conditions we invest. So really, it's an open-ended request to have you all come back maybe in August, September with some ideas about how we move forward, and then how the MOU between the two institutions protects the long-term relationship between our organizations and, candidly, the people we're most trying to serve.
Yeah, thank you for that. We're thrilled to be able to come back, and just want to share, we take officially as RNR on July 1st, but obviously we've already begun the transition. And even in just this transition period, we've laid the ground for a very strong long-term partnership, as well as shared governance around some of the decision-making for this RNR work. So I think you'll be really pleased to see the progress, even though we haven't officially begun our duties until July the 1st.
Got it. Yay. Thank you.
Welcome.
All right. With that, we're going to get a motion to receive the report. Seeing no public speakers on this item.
So moved.
Great. And a second from me. May we get a roll call vote with the request for folks to come back and just let us know how they're doing?
Vice Chairperson Cortese?
Aye.
And Chairperson Chavez?
Yes. Thank you. We're now going to move to item 7. This is the last item before our verbal reports, and this is the Child Sexual Abuse Advocacy Center. And I think I'm turning it over to James Gibbons Shapiro.
Hi, this is James Gibbon Shapiro. I tried to start my video, but I think that it's been blocked.
Yeah, you know what? I did that too because I was just getting your musical hands typing. Let me fix that for you.
Okay, I'm back.
Yay.
All right, so I'm going to share my screen that has some slides, and then I'll turn it over to Jennifer Kelleher, who's going to start us off. Okay. Hopefully people see that?
Yes, we see it, James.
Okay, good. Good to hear. Go ahead, Jennifer.
Although now I only see it small.
Okay, let me see. This is why when we do this live, we have the clerk staff take care of these things instead of me. Let's see if I can make that a little bit bigger. Did that help?
Yes.
Okay.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Okay,
Hi,
good.
everyone. I'm Jennifer Kelleher Cloyd. I'm the Chief Program Officer at the Law Foundation of Silicon Valley. And in this role today, I'm actually here as the co-chair of the task force of the Child Abuse Prevention Council focused on preventing and responding to child sexual abuse. So today, moving on to our next slide, we're here to share with you the recommendations from the Child Abuse Prevention Council Task Force on our responses to child sexual abuse. The slide right before that actually gives you the list of the membership. What I want to just share about this is you can see it's a broad cross-section including systems, law enforcement, victims, family members, and this group actually started meeting as early as 2018. We met bi-monthly for over a year and then moved to monthly meetings right up until the shelter-in-place hit. On the next slide, you'll see that the three of us presenting to you today are going to walk you through a number of the gaps that we identified through the task force, as well as those of us who have worked in the system for a long time. And we're going to be sharing with you some ideas, recommendations, and proposed solutions. I'll just say now, the big reveal is obviously one of the largest solutions is our proposed Child Advocacy Center, which we know all of you support, and James will be sharing more details of how that's coming along later. So let's move on to the next slide and start talking about the gaps. The first gaps that we identified were related to reporting and mandated reporting in particular. And the issues really varied from mandated reporters, of course, not reporting at all, to reporting incorrectly, or instead of reporting, conducting their own investigation to assess the credibility of the disclosure, which obviously, rather than leaving it to the professionals. And then a major one listed at 3 is just, we have seen time and time again recently, the number of institutions who have just failed to respond appropriately to pervasive complaints within their institutions. So at the next slide, some of our proposed responses to addressing this are first and foremost, improved training for mandated reporters that includes communication techniques about how to make a report, what to report, and who to report to, but also includes what not to do to prevent tainting an investigation or potentially traumatizing a child. The other recommendation is, again, related to institutions, and you've heard about this even today in public comment. We've seen so many institutions just get it wrong and sweep disclosures under the rug. So we need training to create a culture change, which includes policies that really reflect that instead of allowing abuse to continue in institutions where adults and adult perpetrators have access to children. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done there. The next slide talks about other gaps we identified really related to our systems response and our challenges in cross-reporting and communication. So a few areas we identified were that DFCS in some cases was trying to confirm more information about a disclosure before cross-reporting. There were just old-fashioned delays in receipt of cross-reports that could be prevented. And then a major gap is just delays and some lost cases between referrals and actual forensic medical examinations happening. So I'm happy to report that on the next slide, you'll see that some of these were really just addressed because we were meeting. So DFCS was able to clarify their process. that a confirmed disclosure was needed first before reaching out to law enforcement. So that was just basically fixed quickly. And also just literally they were using the county pony, our kind of archaic mail system to do cross-reporting instead of other much more quick options. And the last thing was related to the medical referrals. We do feel strongly that, again, the Child Advocacy Center is going to vastly improve that because we're going to have better tracking and coordination of cases to avoid those kids falling through the cracks. And I think I'm turning it over to Juan now for our next slide.
Good morning, President Chavez and Vice President Cortese. I'm going to be covering the police response and the court delays. So there are two main points here. It's the patrol officer response is sometimes lacking, and there are sometimes untimely completion of law enforcement agency investigation. So the next slide, please. With respect to the patrol officers, we recommend there be more training for patrol officers about rapport building and child interviewing techniques. It is the committee's strong recommendation that a professional child forensic interviewer conduct these interviews instead of a patrol officer. I do have some clarifications about this slide. I have updated information. I did speak to all of the agencies here in Santa Clara County, and none of them allow their patrol officers to close out sexual assault cases at the patrol level. The case is referred to detectives for review, even if there is no disclosure by the child victim, and the decision to close out is made at the investigations level with the sergeant's involvement. Some uniformed patrol officers do not create an environment that encourages disclosure. The police uniform by itself can be scary for a child. It is important to note that the patrol level interview is meant to get only a basic description to confirm a sex crime, and then it is sent to the Bureau of Investigations to set up an interview with a child forensic interviewer or a detective trained in child forensic interviews. This happens at the CIC and soon to be CAC. Nevertheless, it is recommended that patrol officers have a more robust training on building rapport with children at initial contact. Next slide, please. For untimely investigations, better data sharing and tracking amongst the agencies involved in sexual abuse investigations will help to make sure that we are paying attention to investigations and all other parts of the process to ensure that cases do not languish. BMC, the nonprofit community, the DA's office, the police, and the Office of Gender-Based Violence are working together on this. Lieutenant Jimenez from San Jose Police Department and I have set up a system to flag cases that need further investigation so that SJPD can better track these cases. Next slide, please. Moving on to evidence testing and court delays, there are two main issues: untested forensic evidence and the court process being too long. Next slide, please. The reforms at the Crime Lab have addressed this gap dramatically, reducing the time for testing of DNA evidence from a sexual assault exam to well under 30 days. It's important to note that judges, prosecutors, and defense attorneys all play a role in the adjudication of a criminal case, and therefore all parties impact how long a case takes to be completed. On the prosecution side, changes are occurring with the advent in recent years of electronic transmission to the defense of criminal discovery, like police reports, recordings, etc. In 2020, a new policy for the timely conveying of the prosecution settlement position, if any, before the second court appearance for the defendant is expected to assist in more timely case resolution. In most sexual assault cases, the defense makes the offer. Because sex cases carry heavier punishment, settlement discussions occur after all discovery is given and reviewed by the parties. Electronic discovery will help tremendously with moving this along. Now I will turn it to Jennifer.
Yes, the last couple of slides related to gaps that we want to present about are really related to children who fall through the system cracks. There's many children where there will not be a prosecution for a variety of reasons, and the Department of Family and Children's Services is not likely to intervene because there is a protective caregiver. Those families typically have serious challenges in terms of obtaining protection for the children and often have to rely on family court to pursue that. They also often do not receive automatic services and don't really know the best resource to access that. The task force was just tackling these issues when the shelter in place hit, and we actually had a scheduled meeting with the supervising judge at family court as well as the leadership of family court services, and unfortunately that is all stalled at the moment. The other issue that I just want to relate is that resources aren't available in particular for families that are low income and aren't able to go out and find a private provider. Next slide. So where we have evolved in terms of initial ideas for addressing this for now until we can meet further with the court is we do know that we need increased training for family court judges and staff. In particular in Santa Clara County, our family court judges often rotate and don't spend a long period of time in their assignment like some of our judges do in juvenile court where they get to understand child sexual abuse dynamics better. The other issue is that family court services and child protective services often do not communicate as much as the law allows them to, which could really help clarify results of investigations and help the family court better understand the dynamics so that they can make appropriate custody arrangements. The other issue that this will help address is our Child Advocacy Center, which again will serve as both a service hub for these families and also can hopefully provide additional resources for navigating systems that are complicated and don't include free legal services.
This is James Gibbon Shapiro again. I was supposed to introduce One Tran, who you heard from. She is the head of our sexual assault team at the DA's office. So you've heard from One Tran. I know that we're probably already over the time you expected for this, so I'm going to try to talk about the last few things quickly. One is that one of the gaps in child sexual abuse prevention is the fact that studies have shown that adults who talk about the fact that they were sexually abused as children often relate that at the time they talked about that with a peer. They may not have talked about it with an adult, but they talked about it with a friend. And one of the things I think that we can do more in here and across the country is thinking about how we can train and educate kids about how to help their peers when they get this kind of information. I'm going to go to the Child Advocacy Center. So as you know, we are full steam ahead with this project. Right now, the Child Advocacy Center, which is co-locating child forensic interviewing, child sexual assault medical examinations and abuse medical examinations and victim services for child victims, is in a permitting process for the renovation of the site at 455 O'Connor. The goal is to have all construction complete by the end of October, beginning of November, to have the city of San Jose approve that we complied with our permitting, with the idea that we'd be ready to open by January. All of you who've been involved with construction projects know that other things can intervene, and there's particular things that might intervene this year if there is a change in public health orders that prevents construction, for example, that might delay this project. So we've set a timeline of opening January to April 2021, but we are on track right now. And I really want to thank Supervisor Cortese and Supervisor Chavez, both of you, for your leadership in this, because the reason why we're on track is because of the strong push that you have made to make sure that that happens. The last thing I wanted to say for you to think about, we heard a great presentation this morning from about prevention of child abuse and child neglect and the ways that county agencies are working broadly to help families to prevent child abuse and neglect. I think another area that the county could consider is in county contracts. The county has contracts with lots of different agencies directly and indirectly that deal with children. And if the county might consider having a requirement for all county contracts for anyone dealing with children that contractor show that they have a child sexual abuse prevention as part of what they do. I'll just give a short example of that. 10 years ago, the DA's office prosecuted a swim coach for USA Swimming and sent him to prison for a very long time. He's likely to be there for the rest of his life. But what became revealed in that prosecution was that actually he had been molesting kids for the past 30 years in swim teams all over Northern California. And since that time, USA Swimming has recommended that its teams have child sexual abuse prevention training, but only 10% of those teams have actually done that. And it made me think, and all of us, to consider whether youth organizations are using county parks, are contracting for county contracts in various ways, and whether there can be something the county can do to make sure that these organizations are having child sexual abuse prevention as part of their work. Thank you.
Thank you. We have two public speakers. I'm going to ask the staff to call on those two public speakers, close the public hearing, and then I'd like to hear from Dave.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Our first speaker is Scott Largent. I am unmuting you. Please accept the unmute. You will have 2 minutes to speak. The timer will start when you begin speaking.
Good morning, everyone. Scott Largent. The Child Abuse Prevention Council meetings, I believe there's several other subcommittees. I stayed clear of those. I was a victim as a child of child abuse in a foster care system. And it's just too hard for me to really talk about it or go to those meetings. What I'm getting at right now, we have stopped those meetings for COVID. Now, we've done the same thing with the Domestic Violence Council right now. And, we're Silicon Valley, 21st century, even my grandma's getting familiar with Zoom right now. My daughter actually knows how to use Zoom. Why are we not having these meetings? I think it is important right now, not only for the child abuse end of things, but domestic violence. All this stuff is just ramping up right now with COVID. Everybody's been stuck at home for 2 or 3 months. We all know domestic violence going through the roof. I'm sure child abuse is also too. Let's have these meetings online. Why is somebody not figuring that out right now? Why are we waiting until the pandemic is over before we all come back to the table? I brought that up for a long time with the Domestic Violence Council. We were getting that train wreck together. We were making quorum. Everything was going great. We were getting printed agendas. We were that close to actually having those meetings televised. We haven't had one in 3 months now. Is that the same case with the Child Abuse Council? All right, thank you, everybody.
Our next speaker is Catherine. I am unmuting you. Please accept the unmute. You will have 2 minutes to speak. The timer will start when you begin speaking.
Hi, thank you, everyone. It's Catherine Campbell again, and I appreciate everything that this group has been able to do as a task force, and especially open the Child Advocacy Center. I'm really looking forward to that. One thing that James did bring up is, having other people, who do they talk to first? People who've been abused and their friends. And that's true. And we do have Aaron's Law approved in California. And just like that was mentioned, they have an opportunity, the swim teams, to have the training, and it's an option. And that is the same with Aaron's Law in California. It's not a forced training for our students, which I wish it was in California. And we have to realize, though, that these children, we've learned so much from Penn State, from the Boy Scouts, from the swim teams, from gymnastics, that there's patterns that these children cannot speak. They're threatened not to tell, and yet we are not accepting the evidence. And even when they actually speak the truth and say, I've been sexually abused, it is being dismissed. And when that is dismissed, you are telling the child that they don't matter, and that they, there's no respect. And we talked about the ACEs, and I think everyone on this call understands the ACEs, but we're creating more ACEs, and we need to stop that. And we need to realize, if the DA doesn't think they can prosecute based on the evidence, that doesn't mean, and what it does mean today to most people is, if they don't prosecute, that the child should be able to be with that abuser. And that is completely wrong. We have enough evidence to protect these children. And we haven't done it in this county. And I know based on what's happening now, we're still not doing it. And we need to change that. We need to put children first. And we need to protect children from all abuse, especially child sexual abuse. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to thank our public speakers, and I'm going to go back to the board. Dave, do you have any comments in this area?
Well, comment just in terms of going forward, coordination, with the timeliness of the period that we're in this week, last week, and so forth. In the context of yesterday's, or rather Tuesday's board meeting, Supervisor Chavez, it seems like the law enforcement training, not just training, but a protocol piece of this, who does what when, the idea that, a forensic specialist should be actually the one doing interaction. It seems like that would be good to fold into the broader discussion we'll be having as a board in terms of law enforcement, restructuring, reform, et cetera. Not that this group doesn't have a handle on it, quite the contrary. I'm just saying I think it would be good to feed or cross-reference this, this good work and this information in to that discussion, because my guess is that at some point we'll be doing some sort of omnibus, reform or restructuring might be a better word at times. And I just wouldn't want this to somehow escape that process. Secondly, I guess this is a question for the DA's office. Is when it comes to bail, I'm trying to grapple with, bail reform, current state law regarding what can be considered in terms of release or not. As I understand from some of the judges that have worked in this area that have answered my questions about it in the past, there's already been the sort of the problem of some knowledge on the part of the judges that you might have a perpetrator who might put a child at risk or a family at risk or something like that. Certainly the DA's office would know that typically at the time of prosecution, but I don't know if I'd call it frustration, but concern that, so much emphasis was on that, that release and bail process is on risk of flight rather than risk of danger to others. Can you just address that and just say, is that still a concern going forward? Is it something that's been resolved? I know there's been some legislative attempts to try to fix that, but I don't know where they are. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. If it is, or if it should be appropriate to say, no, not in this case. And it has nothing to do with flight, really. It has to do with quite the opposite of this person going right back into the environment that they came from, while not in custody and inflicting some more harm.
Thank you, Supervisor Cortese. So I'm going to answer the question, first of all, about what's going on right now while we're in the pandemic, and then also more broadly. So as you're aware, the Santa Clara County Superior Court has extended the $0 bail schedule through August, but it exempts sexual assault cases. So sexual assault cases are not eligible for $0 bail, and the typical bail schedule applies to those cases. So I know some people have been concerned about that, so I want to mention that at the front. On the ballot this fall is an initiative related to bail reform, and DA Rosen supports eliminating cash bail in California, and the voters are going to have a say about that in November. But if cash bail was eliminated in California, the things that the court would be considering is the risk to the community, the seriousness of the offense, and the likelihood of the person coming to court. So all of those three things. And the goal would be that people would be in custody after cash bail was eliminated, whether they were wealthy or not, because they were a danger to the community. So currently, somebody who might have bail set at $500,000, but owns a house in Santa Clara County and can post their house as part of a bail, would get out on bail, but that's really not the goal of bail or pretrial incarceration. It's about making sure that the community is safe. And so getting the money out of that equation, I think, is the goal of that. If bail reform does not pass in California, our current system does allow the court to take into account the seriousness of the offense. But I think you're absolutely right that the main focus, both in the way our courts view it and the way, to be honest, the pretrial services here and other places have thought about it, has had an emphasis on likelihood of coming back to court, and we can see why that is the case. But that is one of the factors, and really one of the roles of prosecutors in this process is to let the judges know what the seriousness of the offense is, in addition to information that they might get from pretrial services about the likelihood of coming back to court.
Okay, thank you very much. I lost my computer rebooted for a few sentences there, so, but rather than try to figure that out going backwards, I'll just have my staff transcribe for me what you said. So I just want you to know, for those that were aware that I disappeared for a second, I'll capture it all. Thank you very much for the response. Background knowledge for me.
Thank you very much. And a couple things that I just wanted to raise. One is that it appears to me that you're about 2/3 through your work. And so what I want to recommend is that as you finish up, that you come back to the committee with recommendations under each subsection that are a little more refined and really that have the policy recommendation that you're making in the language that you would like it made. That would be really helpful to me. And the second thing I wanted to say, just parenthetically, is that I've been reading board reports, actually city council board reports for, it feels like 20 years, and I've never seen a recommendation with an exclamation point before, but I saw that in the packet that says this is the best practice. This is related to the Children's Center, and it's almost everywhere in the United States, which, by the way, it's not, but I understand the point. And it's finally coming to our county, exclamation point. So I don't know who wrote that, but I thought it was a good way to pick up the report. The last thing I just want to say that I don't think will take a lot of time, but I think there are two issues I just want to recommend that you dive into. One is that I think we do need to have a conversation about the mental health implications of going to court or not going to court. We get so much feedback, particularly from victims, that when the DA's office determines that something won't go to court, the implications vary for the person. But I think we need to have a conversation about what happens from a healing perspective if we're not taking that action. And I want to better understand that. And the second thing is that in terms of making sure that the forensic evidence is collected and quickly, is quickly processed. Originally when we had the discussion with the DA's office about how long, the 30-day benchmark was used. And I think this was I really appreciated DA Rosen being thoughtful about this, because I think he wanted to make a commitment that he knew we could keep in the long term. I wanted it to be 15 days. And I will say that one of the things I'm very interested in is for children's cases, that to me, I don't understand why that wouldn't happen like immediately. Now I know there are lots of processes engaged in that, but when this comes back, I'd like to pull out all cases and children's cases to better understand the processing time for those cases. And then lastly, I do want to raise the issue that Jennifer, that you raised around protection of children. I do find the court's engagement on issues of child abuse to be perplexing because of the balance between criminal court, family court. And then if there's any sort of a subset of that family court is that if there is some sort of a divorce or any kind of custody battle that blends into all of that. And I think that I have had a number of very thoughtful, productive discussions with the courts about this in the past. But it really does, I think I would be really interested in you all having a further discussion about what steps could be taken if we're looking at this from the child's perspective, the potential victim's perspective, to restructure the engagement with the courts. I recognize there's nothing we can do about state and federal law out of the box, but restructuring the process at a local level, I have a hard time believing we can't do something about that. So anyway, those would be requests I would have when this comes back. And if, James, if you could just shoot us an email letting us know the timeline, just given I know COVID and all that, but these discussions need to happen right now so that as we, because honestly, we're going to go through another budget cycle without being able to dive into some of these issues. I know we're going to be able to dive into some, but not all. All right, so those are my requests, and I'm going to leave it there. We have 2 more reports to get to. I want to thank everybody. We're going to take a motion to receive the report with the request for timeline information and to have this come back to us. I'd like to say August, September, back to us with these questions addressed. Supervisor Cortese, could I get a motion to that effect? And you're on mute, sorry.
So moved, exactly like that.
All right, second from me, and then we'll have a roll call vote.
Vice Chairperson Cortese?
Aye.
Chairperson Chavez?
Aye. Thank you very, very much. We'll now move to our last 2 reports, and that's a report from Bob and then one from Ignacio.
So good afternoon. Thanks, supervisors. Thanks for the opportunity just to update you quickly on some of the budget activity that's been happening at the state level. Let me preface, what I'm going to say by saying, the numbers don't look good, across the state. So when some folks are up, others are definitely down. There's a lot of winners and losers in the state budget proposal. And I recognize that, so I don't want to make the good news, I think, that we have not acknowledge the downside on the state budget. As we mentioned in the last meeting, the governor's May revise had some good news in it, but also some things of concern, and that kicked off some intense lobbying with the state legislature as part of our folks that we engage as county welfare directors. And to that end, there's a couple of significant things that came through. One is just on the realignment front, and a proposal for backfilling losses in realignment revenue to the tune of about $1 billion. 750 million of that is automatic, and another 250 million is subject to federal triggers. There still needs to be some things figured out as to where exactly that money will go. Realignment has many different sub-accounts and things of that nature, of which social services, behavioral health, kind of the law and justice side of things all participate in. We don't know exactly how that's going to be allocated out, but what I could share is that in the current fiscal year, we were concerned of revenue loss in our programs alone, the order of magnitude of close to $27 million. Rolling into next year, that was going to be, assuming some level of recovery, we were estimating that to be in the $36 million range. Those are significant holes that would have been in our budget. So we're pleased to see that, even though there's details to follow. On the CalWORK side, there was negotiations back and forth on caseloads and such to try to kind of hone that number down so that it was a real number. But on our single allocation side, the part that funds the support that we get to do our service delivery on statewide, the funding for that is up about $600 million. So that was definitely good news in terms of anticipating a greater need and a greater need for especially reemployment type services and things of that nature. Good news on the time limit front that there's a proposal to eliminate the 24-month and 48-month restrictions and moved that to the federal requirement of the 60 months. So we're pleased to see that. Home visiting program under there was restored to the tune of about $30 million. Again, important work, especially in these times. On the CalFresh side, about $80 million to the good on our administration piece. We've seen significant increases in caseload, especially in CalFresh. And there's also a match requirement that they're going to waive on that, at least for the upcoming fiscal year. And also a big push for us was also just continuing the CalFresh simplification in terms of the application process and things like that that the legislature is supporting. Not too much news on Medi-Cal other than the funding level is at least level and it wasn't cut, so that's important. IHSS, there's some reductions in funding there, relatively small statewide, in the tune of about $20 million across two issues that they took savings on. But the good news is that there's increased flexibility on the reassessment piece, allowing us more time to complete that work, given the fact that we've had the shelter in place. And also the 7% reduction to hours was not supported. On child welfare, again, there's things that we were watching on the continuum of care issues. As we well know from the conversation we had earlier today, it's a very complex system that I think was grossly underestimated in terms of what was needed to support it. And we've been pushing hard with the state for what we call a true up of the cost of that program to be able to claw back some of the overspending we've had to do on that front. We mentioned before that the family urgent response system was proposed to be cut, and again, that was restored. And emergency caregiver funding is also included for up to 120 days and waivable up to basically 1 year. So that's a quick touch point of a few of the highlights. So again, these are really tough times, but the priority in this case in terms of maintaining the safety net is encouraging, acknowledging that came at the expense of other things, including post-secondary education funding, things of that nature. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Are there questions? Now, Bob, keep up the good work. I know you guys did yeoman's work just in advocating and really sharing what our needs are. Thank you. Ignacio?
Yes, thank you very much. I also have a budget update. As Bob mentioned, there are some programs that are winners, some that are not faring as well, and others that are being significantly hurt by the new state budget. Child support services statewide is facing a significant reduction. We had hoped that through the deliberations at the state legislature, that some of the reductions would have been reversed. Unfortunately, that was not the case. The statewide program is still facing approximately a $56 million reduction. For Santa Clara County, it amounts to about 14% of our state funding allocation, which is about $5 million. The challenge with that is we were already making up a hole or a deficit of about 2.1 million going into this new budget year before that reduction. So when you add those two together, it's a significant number. We're working with the county, with ESA and Labor Relations, on developing a budget reduction plan. Unfortunately, given some of the preliminary numbers, we do anticipate not only all vacant positions being impacted, but also a impact to filled positions as well. We'll be working through that process with ESA and obviously with our labor unions. I've had a couple of meetings over the last couple of weeks, one with SEMA and our labor management meeting there, and also with SCIU. So we're doing our best to keep both of those labor unions informed as to what's happening and what the potentials are around cuts. It's our hope and our plan that we're able to develop a budget reduction plan that does its best to minimize significant service impacts on our customers, A lot of our partners are also feeling the crunch. The state budget for child support courts is also being impacted negatively. We have 2 courtrooms at the Family Justice Center Courthouse, Department 70 and 71. We're hearing that there are some potential reductions there. We don't know what they consist of yet. Potentially, it may impact calendars and the number of items being able to go before the calendars. We had, when I first started in this county as director, we had 3 judicial officers overseeing our calendars in 3 different courtrooms. We're down to 1.5. My fear is that if that continues to be negatively impacted, obviously it creates issues with access to justice and ensuring that parents who need to get to court and have their matters heard are being able to do so in a timely fashion. So part of what we're doing is seeing what we can do to address some of those potential service issues and access to justice issues. So obviously it's a lot to juggle and a lot of challenges to address to be able to develop a plan that still allows us to serve our customers. We tried to make a case through our state association about how child support is also a safety net program. In terms of collections, just to give you an idea of where we are, if you compare April of 2020 to April of 2019, we saw an approximate decrease of about 20% in collections just for the month of April 19 compared to April 20. Obviously, that's due to folks not being employed and the impacts of COVID-19 on the economy, especially here locally. So it's a difficult time for child support. We'll continue to push through working with our stakeholders, but our priority now is to ensure that we do our best to manage the reductions in a way so that the parents that and children that rely on our services are still able to have their needs met. But I can tell you, what Bob said rang true in terms of the fact that there's some programs that are really being hit hard. So we'll continue to work through this process and keep the committee informed, as well as working through the county budget process with a target date for that budget hearing in the middle of August. And with that, I can take any questions.
Thank you very much, Ignacio. And I really feel for your program because it's one that's so important to our families and often overlooked at a state level. So thank you for the report. We'll look forward to the budget hearings as well. We have no other items before us and no public speakers. So with that, I'm going to adjourn our meeting. We have a set schedule for Thursday, August 27th at 9:30, but we may be looking at an earlier one. We will let all of you know. Thanks, everyone. Have a good rest of your day. Bye.